Title: Cardamom. Author: more than just a dish. Copywriting end of the main text. Extra episodes will be updated from time to time. Husband, the snow satin has been out of date for 3 months. Do you not love me? TVT. On the Lantern Festival in Shangyuan, the Empress Yongyuan hosted a banquet. In the Ming Dynasty, the emperor and his ministers enjoyed together, but in fact, His Royal Highness Ding Bei chose the princess. At the banquet, Yingying, the daughter of Marquis Chang'an, kowtowed and offered to present a song of Xiaoxiang Shuiyun. At the end, she said tenderly, "The minister is not talented, she is showing her ugliness." The man in the black brocade suit interrupted coldly, "If you know it's ugly, don't offer it." The whole house was silent, and no one dared to speak out to refute. The young lady of the Ming family who was sitting with her at the last table peeked from a distance, and felt that His Royal Highness King Ding Bei was rebellious and rude, extremely arrogant, and he was not really a kind person. Later, at the night of festivities and candles in the bridal chamber, the wine was exhausted, and the red candles were shining brightly. The little lady of the Ming family undressed the man tremblingly. The man suddenly said, hearing that her song Pingsha Luoyan moved to Beijing. She pretended to be dignified and blessed her body, but she was so nervous that she forgot to refuse, and she only tried to say, "I am not talented, so, present your ugliness." She raised her eyes and peeked, but met a pair of eyes that seemed to be smiling but not smiling. "It's not ugly, I just think that my wife is very beautiful. If you act wild, I will accompany you with wine in this life." This sentence is the lyrics of Hair Like Snow, from the delicate hair to the pattern of the solace, the squeamish little lady X, the ruthless person who shows off the of war. His Royal Highness King Ding Bei overhead / slow heat / a hodgepodge of official customs / are all ancient locals. Please don't use modern standards to ask characters. Content tags. Marquis of the Court has a special liking for a sweet match made in heaven. Search keywords. Protagonist: Ming Tan, Jiangsu. Supporting role: others. 1 sentence introduction: If you play wild, I will accompany you with wine in this life. Conception: know each other, love each other, and grow together. VIP pushes the medal. Ming Tan, the youngest daughter of the Jing'anho mansion, was betrayed by her fiancé-in-law, and she didn't want to be married to Jiangsu, the famous of war, after the marriage contract was dissolved. Ming Tan thought Jiangsu was rude, rebellious, and vulgar, a reckless man who doesn't want to marry each other, but sneaks into the barracks to see each other and falls in love with him at first sight. He only hopes to get married as soon as possible. After marriage, the two gradually developed a love for each other while getting along. Jiangsu, who originally married Ming Tan for other reasons, also gradually fell in love. The two experienced many sweets and tribulations together, and the lovers finally became married. This work is fluent in writing, delicate in brush strokes, humorous in language, fresh in style, brisk in rhythm, and three-dimensional and vivid in characters. It is worth reading. It was midwinter, and the snow in Shangjing was like goose feathers. The cold wind swirled around the lanterns at the corners of the corridor. In the 5th watch, the outside was faintly silvery white. Jing'anho's mansion, in the Zhao Shui courtyard, green plum branches are covered with fresh snow. The sound of clappers that disturbed people's dreams before has gradually faded away, and the hurried steps of the servants and maids in the mansion can be heard again in this silent night. After a while, there were 2 knocks of tuk-tuk outside the main room door, and someone whispered, "Miss." It was Mama Zhang, who was serving by Mrs. Ho's side. Sua Xin was laying out her breakfast. Seeing Ming Tan sitting down and not responding, she gave Lui, who was standing behind Ming Tan, a look. Lu understood, put down the horn comb in her hand, and walked lightly to meet people outside Mingjian. It was probably the door opened by the duty. When Lu arrived in the morning, Zhang's mother was leading the lady from Jingxi Yufang and a group of little girls holding drawers to enter. Through the dim candlelight, the light green skirt of the second-class maidservant of Jing'anho mansion seemed to form a neat arc around the door. "Mother Zhang." Lu was bright and greeted with a smile. Zhang's mother rolled her eyes, quickly reached out to help, and looked at the other side of the screen. She just looked around, and saw that Lu was here to meet her, which meant that the little lady would not come out. She and Lui are fairly familiar, and after a few words of greeting, she attracted the lady from Jingxiu workshop to introduce the new clothes and tops for the banquet this time. The leather that Mrs. Ho sent is shiny, smooth, and flawless. It is a rare and high-quality product. I heard that it is an imperial gift during the autumn hunting. It is a great sin if it is not done well. No, you can put us. The shopkeeper is so worried. After thinking about it, our shopkeeper went to invite Mrs. Zhang to do needles in person. Miss Lu, you know that Mrs. Zhang doesn't usually do needlework after she gets married. The shopkeeper spent a lot of money to invite her to do needles. It took a lot of work. Look, this embroidery pattern, this stitch. As the lady of Jingxi Yufang introduced, the little girl behind her brought the neatly ironed silver fox cloak to Lu, and let her hold her eyes. Lu approached, looked carefully for a while, and admired slightly in her eyes. It is full of embroidery, and the silver satin is also very good, and the leather is not spoiled. She checked it inside and out, and after confirming that it was correct, she said with satisfaction, this time the palace banquet came suddenly, and the lighting of the lights was so exquisite. Your shopkeeper has a heart. The mother-in-law humbly smiled, and her heart finally settled down. The little ancestor served by Miss Lu is Ming Tan, the youngest daughter of the Marquis of Jing'an. Since she was a child, she has been favored by thousands of people, and she has seen many good things, and she is very picky. Even for ordinary things, it is not easy to get the green calyx beside her to nod. It just so happened that this little ancestor was kind to the shopkeeper of his house, and before dawn today, the shopkeeper sent her to deliver clothes from the Jing'an home mansion, and specifically told her that she had to go to the little lady's place in person. Thanks to Lu's careful words, she was finally able to go back to get a good job and sleep peacefully. On the side of Zaya Shuiyuan, Lu collected her clothes, stuffed her rich purse, and politely sent Mama Zhang and her party out of the Chihuahua gate. On the other side of the Fenghe courtyard, another line of women and maids delivering clothes slowed down and just entered the main room. Mama Huang, who was also serving Mrs. Ho, saluted and introduced clothes and jewelry to Shen Hua, a cousin girl living in Ho's mansion, with a smile. Shen Hua listened, and glanced at the brocade costume gemstone hairpin in the drawer, and finally softly said, "Thank you Mama Huang for making this trip." "Hua, thank you madam." Immediately, he gave another wink to the personal maid. The maid understood, stepped forward with small steps, and stuffed Mama Huang with an exquisitely embroidered purse. The purse is exquisite, but there is not much money in it. After leaving the Feng Gaiwan, Madame Huang rolled up her sleeves to find out the reality. She didn't care about the slightest reward, but just happened to meet Zhang's mother and her party who came out of Zaya Shuiyuan, and it happened that she and Zhang's mother didn't get along very well. "I've heard that there is a lot of rewards for going to the young lady's business." "It's true. When I leave the house another day, I can buy the rouge I saw in Lancui Pavilion before." Behind Mama Zhang, a round-faced little girl who had just been promoted to the second class and returned to Zhao Shui courtyard was discussing with her companions. The tall girl behind Madame Huang couldn't help but sneered when she heard this. "It's just an ordinary reward. When you go to buy rouge, don't say that you are from our Ho's mansion. Don't let people think that Jing and Ho's mansion came out. They've never seen the world before." The little girl with a round face rose from the third class to the second class in just half a year, and her verbal skill should not be underestimated. She hurriedly acted surprised. Such a reward is not unusual. Could it be that the reward given by the cousin girl can buy a rouge shop? "You. Okay, don't be as knowledgeable as her." Someone grabbed the tall girl. "We are all from the wife's courtyard, and we only care about one thing when we go out on business, and nothing else matters." The tall man was persuaded to lose his temper, and followed the words to think of the key point, and smiled instead of anger. "Yet, running errands is all about smoothness, and the whole family, I'm afraid there is nothing more smooth than going to the cousin's place to do errands. It's gone. She didn't tell the little lady about the cumbersome errands, but the little round face pretended not to know and didn't respond. The tall girl said again, speaking of which, it's rare, the cousin girl is gentle and beautiful, with excellent talents and sentiments, and she treats the servants so kindly. I think it's even more rare to have a good brother. Another girl behind Mama Huang interjected. The tall girl agreed, that's right, with little General Shen around, cousin girl's future will definitely not be bad. The little round face smiled, the two sisters are concerned, the madam and the young lady are our serious masters, the future of the cousin girl is the fate of the cousin girl, but it has nothing to do with the two sisters. The tall man choked back without even thinking about it. Biao girl lives in the Hose mansion, and the Hose mansion of Jiancheng has a reputation, so why can't she care? Maybe after today is over, she will fly to the branch and go to Changjiu. The street has moved. It seems that there is a sudden cold wind passing through the corridor. The East Garden corridor, which was still lively just now, suddenly became quiet because of these words. Everyone in Shangjing knows that there is only one mansion on Changjiu Street. The one who lives inside is not something everyone can mention in Daxian. The two mothers who didn't hear these arguments stopped suddenly, turned around and scolded, "What are you talking about? The one on Changjiu Street is also something you can arrange? Who gave you the courage to gossip here? Rude." The girls were startled, knowing that they had said something wrong. They all held their breath, their heads wishing they could hang down to their toes. The Changjiu Street just mentioned, her face turned pale with fright, and the sandalwood end in her hand was shaking. Someone mentioned Changjiu Street, and the two mothers became very angry. After following the East Garden, the servants were afraid of being discovered, so they dared not follow again. In the Fenghe courtyard, Shen Hua stood in front of the window of the main room, listening to the maidservant's report of her eavesdropping. After listening, the corners of her lips curled up, and she looked in the direction of Zaya Shuiyuan, with a trace of contempt in her eyes that did not match her usual gentleness. So this lady is neither gentle nor beautiful, not as talented as her, and she is not kind enough to you. Oh, this lady's brother is not as brave and good at fighting as little General Shen, and his future is not good enough. In Zaya Shuiyuan, Ming Tan sat at the table with his chin resting, repeating slowly. The fragrance of Yun's hung tea is soft and light, hidden in the aroma of the morning meal, which seems to be absent. That face, as white and clear as fat jade, was hidden behind the curling white mist rising from the boiling tea, making it somewhat unclear. Don't worry about that naughty young lady with a bad mouth. The young lady's appearance and temperament are outstanding among the ladies in Beijing. Lu couldn't stop her in time, so the little girl who answered said the whole thing, and now she had to change the topic to make up for it. By the way, miss, the servants have read all the things madam sent, and today I enter the palace, just how about wearing this? Lu specializes in clothing in Zaya Shuiyuan, and has some insights into the matching of clothes and jewelry. After a while, she started talking about the cloak embroidered with white fox and silver satin from the character Tan specially engraved on the hosta. There was no response after saying everything. Lu couldn't help raising her eyes and peeking, "Miss." Her voice was a little more cautious. Sua Xin, who served the meal, filled a bowl of porridge and put it in front of Ming Tan, and also helped to remind, "Miss, you have to look at the clothes." Ming Tan raised his head and glanced at the drawer in Lue's hand, "Just this one, it doesn't matter what you wear." Immediately, he changed his hand to rest his chin, and fiddled with the porcelain spoon in the porridge bowl with the free hand. Just after 5 o'clock, she was wearing pajamas embroidered with pear blossoms and white branches, and a soft fox cloak, hanging down her waist like a waterfall of blue silk, and only a lock of broken hair restlessly rested on her thin cheeks. She didn't know what she was thinking, but her crow-feather eyelashes trembled from time to time, as if responding to the flickering candlelight reflected on the wall of the bowl, looking at her with a bit of beauty like jade. It's a pity that the beauty has a bad appetite at the moment, and the heat of a bowl of white porridge has dissipated without moving a second time. Seeing her like this, Sua Xin, who is always quiet, couldn't help persuading her, "White porridge nourishes the stomach, miss, you should use some more, you have to enter the palace today. Palace banquets are well regulated, not as comfortable as dining at home." Sua Xin is also kind. It's okay not to mention it, but when it was mentioned about entering the palace, Ming Tan felt even more congested in his heart. Usually, there was no palace banquet in Shangyuan, but the noble family knew the reason for the special palace banquet this time. In the palace, there is still a need to cover up, even someone like her who already has a marriage contract has to go to the banquet together. If it was normal, it would be fine to join in the fun, but now her mind is full of the bad news that her fiancé-in-law had with his cousin and had an illegitimate child long ago. Although this matter was covered up to death, even her personal servant girl didn't know about it, but the illegitimate child was already 2 years old, and he would call him daddy when he was alive and kicking. Ironclad evidence. Thinking of the fact that this marriage, which everyone envied her and was quite proud of in the past, would most likely end in a way that is not decent at all, Ming Tan felt that the silver charcoal in the charcoal basin made her internal organs blaze. I also felt that the porridge, which had lost its heat, became cold all the way from my throat to the bottom of my heart. Don't eat. She was upset, put down the porcelain spoon, got up and walked into the inner room. Sua Xin looked at her back and sighed. Without any further persuasion, she directed the little girls to remove the almost untouched breakfast table. "Miss, what's the matter the past few days? If you think those girls are talking behind their backs, you can tell madam to send them away, so you don't even look at the clothes. The young lady of their family cares most about her attire, every time she goes out, she has to go from the delicate hair to the pattern of the solace of her shoes. No wonder Lu is suspicious." She leans close to Sua Xin and whispers to her ear. Sua Xin didn't know either. "I asked when I was on duty yesterday, but the lady didn't say anything, maybe she just wanted to be quiet." "All right, I'll go to the kitchen to cook a bowl of shredded chicken porridge." "Don't bother miss." Sua Xin is a bit older and meticulous and steady, which Ming Tan values the most. Lu pursed her mouth, didn't dare to refute, just twisted the silk sash around her waist and watched Sua Xin go out. But when Sua Xin's figure disappeared outside the hanging flower door, she turned around immediately and walked into the inner room lightly. The inner room of Zaya Shuiyuan is elegantly and exquisitely furnished, from the large carved couch to the small silver hook, each of which can tell a twists and turns, and the incense in different seasons and weathers is also particular. Today, there is a faint pear fragrance in it, which seems to be absent, sweet and slightly cold. Ming Tan was sitting in front of the dressing table, still half supporting his head, with a sluggish look. "Miss, will this servant continue to comb your hair?" Lu stepped forward and asked cautiously. Ming Tan didn't respond, so she took it as a default, and while combing Ming Tan's hair with a corner comb, she thought that she was caring to solve her worries. "Miss is worrying about my cousin, and the girl is going to enter the palace today?" "Don't worry, miss, what is that master? Status, how can you really fall in love with the cousin girl? Even if you like it, because of the cousin girl's family background, being a side concubine is very reluctant. How can you compare with you, miss, and the lady will be a serious wife of the prince's family in the future." Ming Tan. "Besides, our eldest son has a dignified appearance and outstanding literary talents. Who in the whole capital would not envy you and the eldest son, a golden boy and a beautiful girl, a perfect match?" This sentence is very low, but the tone of honor is like a needle piercing to Ming Tan's ears. Who wants to be a natural match with that faceless and skinless? He deserves it too. She was afraid that if this girl said a few more words, she would vomit blood out of anger, so she closed her eyes and raised her hand to signal to stop. "Bring the mirror." Lu didn't know what she said wrong, but fortunately her brain turned quickly. She hurriedly took off the small bronze mirror, and changed her tone in a sensible way. standing aside and praised Ming Tan's appearance of falling geese and sinking fish. Ming Tan looked at the person in the mirror carefully, but didn't answer. It's just that from the corners of her lips that are gradually raised, it's not hard to see that she takes Lu's praise very seriously. This girl Lu's outrageous words and deeds often pierce her heart, but there is one sentence that is right: with such a face, you can use a few more bowls of rice alone. After taking a selfie in the mirror for a while, her anger that day also inexplicably subsided, and there was only one thought in her mind: why is this lady so beautiful? The good mood brought by appreciating beauty lasted until he left the palace and entered the palace. Outside the second gate, the chariots and horses have already been prepared. When Ming Tan appeared slowly holding a hand warmer, Mrs. Ho Pei and her cousin Shen Hua were already sitting in the car. Seeing Ming Tan taking off his cloak and getting into the carriage with his head down, a little smile appeared in Pei's eyes. Tan, come up quickly. After Ming Tan sat down, she was concerned again in a warm voice. How did you untie the cloak? It's cold, so be careful. It's warm in the car. I don't understand it now. It will be cold when I get out of the car later. Ming Tan smiled with his eyes bent, and obediently returned his hold to Pei Shi. It was my fault for telling my mother to wait. Mrs. Pei cast a light glance at her. What sins are not sins? Don't say such things today in Shangyuan. Yes, my daughter knows it's wrong. Ming Tan leaned into Pei's arms, and even coquettishly drew a long tail. Pei helplessly nodded her forehead. You are used to be good. Shen Hua, who was sitting across from her, saw this scene, covered her lips with a smile and said, Auntie and cousin have a deep love for mother and daughter. Hua is really envious. Pei could not help but look at Shen Hua with a smile. Since ancient times, it has been difficult to continue. Ming Tan is the daughter of the first wife, who is backed by a powerful family. In the first few years when Mrs. Pei married into the Ho's mansion, she was afraid that others would accuse her of being mean and losing her mother an orphan. She took care of Gu Mingtan more carefully than her own Lord Ho. She hasn't done anything in these years, so she should have worried about the unstable position of the mistress of the Ho mansion, but because of her close relationship with Ming Tan, she has gained a good reputation as virtuous among the noble ladies in Shangjing. It's done steadily. Because of these reasons, and Pei's reputation is quite good, those who are interested will know that it is better to praise her and Mingtan than to praise her and Mingtan. At this moment, Mrs. Pei was extremely flattered in her heart, but because of Shen Hua's voice, Ming Tan's mood took a turn for the worse without him. Shen Hua lived in the Ho mansion for half a year. Ming Tan and her lived in peace on the surface, but there were many signs of seeing each other behind the scenes. Hearing Shen Hua's greasy voice now, Ming Tan couldn't stop thinking about his own bad marriage and the gossips from the girls in the house. Those gossips were outrageous, but she wasn't sure it was impossible. After all, the man from Changjihu Street has been on expeditions all year round, so he probably hasn't seen many beauties. These illiterate military generals are used to being arty, and they wish to hire a room full of talented women to prove that they are not reckless people. Her father is the best example, and the foreign boss even brought Aunt Lu to recite poems to fight against him. If Shen Hua entered Changjihu Street and flew up the branches, but she lost her marriage because of her fiancé's betrayal, wouldn't she become the biggest joke in Shangjing, the young lady of the Ming family? Seeing that it hasn't happened yet, those little girls can arrange it like this. If this happens, and they don't cut their hair to become a sister-in-law, there may be no place for her Ming family, Tan, in Shangjing. The sound of the car was buzzing in his ears, and Ming Tan became more and more angry when he thought about it, and even felt a little blocked in his heart. When the carriage stopped outside the Kixuan gate with a wow, she was still stuck in a depressed mood and couldn't extricate herself. When officials and family members enter the palace, servants in chariots and horses are not allowed to accompany them. Mrs. Pei handed over the order plate, and the maid in the palace checked whether they were carrying any sharp weapons, and only then did the servants come to lead them to Yongyuan where the banquet was held today. Since Daxian came to power, except for selection, female family members who had no imperial orders rarely entered the palace, and it was the first time that such a banquet was widely invited. The deep palace covered with red walls and snow is solemn and majestic. Every step forward, the pressure seems to increase, making it difficult to breathe. So much so that the road to Yongyuan was very quiet, and no other voices could be heard, except for the slight creaking sound of short boots stepping on the thin snow. Everyone concentrates on moving forward, no one pays attention, and the window of the Nuan Pavilion in the nearby high place is opened. It's a good thing that Swabei Road takes over Dongzhou. You can also rest in the capital for a while. By the way, Aksu, you are also 21st this year, right? Why don't you take advantage of this time to decide on the marriage, start a family and carry on the family line? But it's a big deal. It just so happened that at the Yongyuan garden today, the queen specially invited all the female family members of the appropriate age into the palace, and told me which lady she liked. As long as her family was clean and her conduct was dignified, I would marry you. Ever since he entered the Nuan Pavilion, Emperor Chengkong had been talking about it all the way, from the war in the north to the victory in Dongzhou, and finally brought the topic to the matter of marriage quite naturally. Just when he was about to try harder to persuade him, Empress Zhang, who was standing aside, covered her lips and coughed. While looking out the window, she leaned closer and said softly, "Among the women in this group, the little girl in the silver cloak on the left, my concubine looks the rules are pretty good." Cheng Kangdi was interrupted, subconsciously squinted his eyes, and looked out the window. After a long while, Emperor Chengkong nodded, seemingly satisfied. The queen's eyesight is indeed not bad. He told the servant, "Go and find out, whose girl is that?" "Yes." The waiter waited, bowed and retreated. Cheng Kangdi turned his head again, and looked at the man in black beside him. "Asu, would you like to take a look too? After all, it is for you to choose a concubine, and it must be in your favor." Accompanied by the voice that was about to fall, a gust of cold wind with frost and snow came in through the window, and the black brocade suit darkly embroidered with python noir patterns was blown up on one side, and the man stood quietly in front of the window with his hands behind his back. Glanced down and looked away without emotion. Cheng Kangdi. This is just one glance, really just one glance. Cheng Kangdi was speechless for a while. Fortunately, he has long been used to the love and indifference of the person beside him, so he didn't think it was disrespectful, so he temporarily gave up talking to this person, and while waiting for the servant to report back, he turned his head and chatted with Queen Zhang in a low voice. Just for a while, Empress Zhang looked at Ming Tan's back, feeling more and more satisfied. Most of these little girls are returning to the palace for the first time. Although the family has taught them enough rules, there are very few people who are not afraid of the majesty of the imperial city. If there is fear in the heart, it is inevitable to be timid and cramped. I have seen so many girls along the way, but this one is the one with the most decent manners, and she walks in a row with a calm and elegant style, which is very pleasing to the eye. After a while, the servant returned to the Nuan Pavilion, bowed and replied, Your Majesty, this is Madame Jing'an-ho, the fourth Miss of Jing'an-ho's mansion, and the sister of little General Shen who lives in Jing'an-ho's mansion. Shen Yu's younger sister. Emperor Chengkong raised his eyebrows. The servant hurriedly replied, Little General Shen's younger sister is the one with the golden feather satin cloak, and the one with the silver fox embroidered cloak the fourth lady of the Jing'an Marquis mansion. Jing'an-ho mansion, this family name is quite suitable. Empress Zhang was thinking of this, when the servant added, Miss Jing'an-ho's fourth lady has already made a marriage contract with the son of Duke Ling. Already engaged. Queen Zhang paused, this is really. Ling Qiagong's mansion is full of old honors, she can't say the word unfortunate, but there is no regret on her face. Seeing this, Emperor Chengkong casually added a sentence, there is already a marriage contract, so it's not easy to break up the marriage. There was regret in his words, but he didn't take it seriously in his heart. When he heard Jing'an-ho's mansion, he had already excluded this fourth lady of the Ho's mansion. After a short pause, he pointed to the already blurred back in the distance. I look at Shen Yu's sister is also very good. The status of the Shen family is a bit lower, but it's okay to be a side concubine. Empress Zhang was not interested in choosing a concubine's room. She lowered her eyes and straightened her cuffs, and did not respond to this. Emperor Chengkong turned his head and asked again, Su, what do you think? Don't you appreciate that Shen Yu? No way. If your majesty thinks it's good, you might as well bring it into the harem. The voice was neither high nor low, and it was a little bit impatient. The servants around couldn't help but feel startled and their knees weak when they heard it. The ground dragon was clearly burning in the Nuan pavilion, but everyone couldn't help trembling and lowered their heads. The officials and family members who attended the banquet knew nothing about what happened in the Nuan pavilion. After entering the Yang Yuan garden, everyone was led to the Chongming Hall and attended in turn. The seats in Jing Anho's mansion are right next to the gate of the Chongming Hall, and those who are further behind can only blow cold wind outside the hall. Shen Hua followed Mrs. Pei to the seat, but she was a little puzzled. She has been in Beijing for half a year, and she knows very well that the Jing Anho's family is famous and has a good status in Beijing, but why is the banquet held in the palace today so far away? Shen Hua was puzzled, but Ming Tan was very clear. In a place like Shangjing, where dignitaries gather, a marquee is actually nothing. The Jinganho mansion is now so full of flowers and brocades, mostly because her father, Jinganho, is a feudal official who holds real power and guards the border. The nobles are the first to attend the palace banquet, and there are more than a dozen of the duke's mansions above their marquee mansion, and counting the royal family, it is a special privilege to be able to attend the palace banquet. At this moment, there were many people in the Chongming Hall, but it was quiet. After Ming Tan sat down, he glanced towards the position of Duke Ling's mansion in front of him as if inadvertently. It's okay not to scan, but after this glance, she felt unexplainably angry again. The Duke Ling's mansion thought that no one knew about her scandal or didn't take her Ming family, A Tan, seriously, and brought the cousin who had a head and a tail here in a grand manner. Did they think it was some kind of occasion, that they wanted to bring someone over to make a familiar face in front of her so that they could get along with each other and serve her husband together? Pei Shi noticed that Ming Tan's expression was different, and called softly, A Tan, what's wrong? The Pei family still didn't know what the Duke's mansion was hiding. Ming Tan looked away, reluctantly replied nothing, and forced himself to suppress his anger, and sat upright, not expecting anything more. No one in Lingguo's mansion noticed Ming Tan's gaze before, but now that the female relatives of Jing Anho's mansion have arrived, they couldn't help but look over from a distance. Mrs. Ling Qiaogong was also included in this scrutiny, and she was somewhat complacent while sizing her up. The Ming family, A Tan, has always had a good reputation among the ladies in Beijing. His family background, appearance, and piano skills are all top-notch. His temperament is also suitable for movement and tranquility. It is very rare that he can not only please his husband and son-in-law, but also be able to handle the big scene. Fortunately, the marriage was arranged early, otherwise there must be a family with hundreds of daughters begging. Mrs. Ling Qiaogong can be said to be 120% satisfied with this marriage, but her worry-free son thinking of this, she glanced back, and just happened to catch a glimpse of the woman timidly helping the teacup again, and she couldn't help but sigh in her heart. Although she is her niece, she can't be on the stage. After all, she won't be on the stage. I don't know how long this matter can be kept a secret. The term of Marquis Jing'an has expired, and when he returns to Beijing to report on his duties, the marriage of the two families will be put on the agenda. If she wanted to marry the Ming family's A Tan into the door smoothly, she had to make plans for this matter early. Everyone in the hall has their own thoughts, but what is on the surface is exactly the same, respectful and quiet. This silence lasted until the front servant shouted in a shrill voice, "The Empress is here!" All the people gathered their minds and stood up, kneeling in the direction of the Queen. "See the Empress is blessed and safe." Get up! Empress Zhang's voice was quite gentle, and she seemed to have a smile on her face. Today's Shang Yuan, I invite you all to enter the palace just to make it lively. Everyone sit down, there is no need to be formal. Having said that, those who really dared to sit down informally have not yet entered the Eternal Brightness Hall alive, and everyone Chi Kifu responded yes before sitting down properly. The order of banquets in the palace has always been cumbersome. Although Empress Zhang avoided some unnecessary ceremonies, after going through the process step by step, the delicacies for sharing were completely cold. All the wives and noble ladies took a symbolic bite or two, maintaining a quiet and dignified appearance at all times. The hall is full of silk and bamboo, and the dancer is graceful. From time to time, the family members and female relatives at the front chatted with Empress Zhang about interesting things in Beijing, and there were occasional brisk laughter coming from behind, and the atmosphere was considered relaxed. In the middle of the banquet, a servant rushed to Queen Zhang to pass on a message. I don't know what was passed on. Queen Zhang ordered a few words, and then someone added 2 new positions to the first song. Although everyone didn't look directly at them, they were all clear in their hearts. This tasteless palace banquet was finally getting to the point. Sure enough, as soon as this idea came up, some servants shouted back one after another, "The emperor is here." Ming Tan was thinking about his marriage with Duke Ling's mansion. When he heard this sound, he hurriedly put aside his distracting thoughts, and went forward to salute with the others. There was a shout of "Long live" in the hall, which seemed to echo in the open space. After Yu Shengping, a gentle yet majestic Ping Shen came from above. Ming Tan was reminded of an accident. His Majesty's voice was much younger than expected. Then King Dingbei is the cousin of the Holy Lord, so isn't he younger? When I was seated, I heard Empress Zhang say, "A month ago, Dongzhou won a great victory. It is my great joy. It just so happens that today, His Majesty invited all the ministers to celebrate the meritorious service of King Dingbei in Hong'an Hall. I think now, even though we are women, we should respect Daxian's good son Lang Cai, so Tet invited the Emperor and King Dingbei here." After about a moment of silence, someone started, and the voices of praise and praise from the front came one after another, endlessly. Ming Tan knows that noble ladies in Beijing pay attention to subtlety and euphemism, but he doesn't want to be reserved in the palace, and they have to make more detours. He is obviously looking at the princess, so he wants to call him a name of praise. She was far away, plus she couldn't peek at Long Yan. The first 3 people were all a blur in the corner of her eyes. Just as she was thinking, could it be that His Royal Highness Dingbei is a dumb man? Before such a toast and compliment can be said, a familiar charming female voice suddenly sounded from the opposite side. "I have heard that His Highness, at the age of tying up his hair, led 3,000 elite soldiers to block 3. The barbarians of the Wanbei region have made great achievements for Daxian, and my daughter has admired His Highness for many years. It is really a blessing to meet you today. My daughter is willing to present a song Xiaoxiang Water Cloud to His Highness. She is the second daughter of Marquis Chenzhen, Gujira. Cheng Yinho's mansion has always been unafraid of people's words, and the Yugui concubine, who was angrily denounced by the imperial censor for seducing the lord, is now still thinking about the position of the princess of Dingbei's mansion. A word of admiration has been said, which is already available in dance and music." Gujira kowtowed profusely, and finally said humbly, "The minister is not talented, she is making a fool of herself." Ming Tan has been learning the piano since she was a child, under the tutelage of famous masters. If someone wants to perform the piano art in front of her, she is a little curious about how the other party will amaze everyone. It's a pity that she didn't have such a good ear. As soon as the charming voice in the front fell, the man in black brocade at the top interrupted coldly, "If you know you are ugly, don't offer it." For a moment in the hall, it was so quiet that the drop of a needle could be heard. In a trance, Ming Tan thought that he had heard something wrong. Although His Royal Highness King Dingbei had won the Sacred Heart and held a lot of power, Gujira was also the daughter of Marquis Chenzhen after all, so it was too insolent and rude to speak like this. After a long time, the only two people in the palace who were qualified to refute did not say a word. Empress Zhang's silence is understandable. After all, Gujira's first sister, concubine Yugui, has often made things difficult for her in the harem. But Emperor Chengkong, who had always been favored by concubine Yugui, didn't even say a word of perfunctory to smooth things over, and just drank alcohol on his own, as if the current matter had nothing to do with him. Until the black brocade robe left, there was silence in the hall, and the servants just bowed to see him off. No one dared to stop him. Before going to the banquet, probably no one expected that this palace banquet would end so hastily. It was not yet the end of the unitary year when I left the palace, the sky was about to get dark, and the imperial street was just beginning to be lit. Ming Tan stepped on the sedan chair and was about to get in the car, when he suddenly heard someone shouting from behind, "A Tan!" She turned her head, and when she saw who was coming, she couldn't help smiling. After Bai Minmin yelled this, she was about to go forward immediately, but Ming Tan inadvertently looked back and smiled, and the flickering lights behind her seemed to be silent and pale in an instant. White teeth and bright eyes are like full autumn water, light eyebrows and curved lips are like stars and moons. There are beauties, that's all. Bai Minmin stared at the place for a while, and only recovered after being reminded by her personal servant girl. Bai Minmin is the legitimate daughter of the chief house of Duke Chong, Ming Tan's direct cousin. Because of the similar age, they have been close since childhood, and the two are also friends in the boudoir who have played since childhood. Earlier in the Chongming Hall, the seats of the Duke of Changguo and the Marquis of Jing'an were in the same left row, and the two failed to meet face to face. Now that he was out of the palace, Bai Minmin couldn't wait to find her. She stepped forward to hug Ming Tan affectionately, and then cleverly bowed to Mrs. Pei, Minmin Pei's auntie greetings. She has an outspoken personality and doesn't like to make detours, so she expressed her intentions straight after asking for safety. "Auntie, today is Sheng Yuan. I specially asked my elder brother to book a private seat on the Linjiang River in Tingyu Tower, and I want to invite Aden to go with me to enjoy the lanterns. Auntie will lend me a tan for a few hours." Bai Minmin's serious aunt is Ming Tan's late biological mother, Bai Shi. With her status and temperament, she is willing to take the initiative to call Pei Shi aunt, which is undoubtedly the best affirmation of Pei's virtuous reputation. Not to mention how comfortable Pei was, there was nothing she could not agree to. She smiled and said decent things, sent her entourage to accompany her, and explained to Lu in detail, telling her to take good care of her young lady. I have to admit that Mrs. Pei is a smart person. Bai Minmin didn't mention Shenhua at all, and she just forgot that being the mistress of the home mansion should be considerate in every way, and she didn't say any unnecessary gossip about asking Shenhua to go to the bustle with her. When Bai Minmin left with Ming Tan, Pei didn't feel embarrassed, just pretending nothing happened. Xiao Yingying talked to Shenhua about the various prepared in the mansion today. Shenhua felt that these three people deliberately ignored her and was humiliated for no reason. When she responded to Pei, she smiled a little forcefully, and her hands clenched under her sleeves turned white. Shenhua wrote about this all night, but Bai Minmin forgot about it when he turned around. On the way to Tingyu Tower, she lamented for a while how Mrs. Pei knew how to behave, and then complained along the way about how many complicated rules her new sister-in-law had set and how difficult her life was after being an assistant. Ming Tan wanted to ask Bai Minmin about something serious, but on this lantern festival, the roads were full of noise and excitement, so it was not convenient for him to talk. She had no choice but to hold back her temper and wait until she arrived at Tingyulu to inquire carefully. Tingyulu is the most famous tea house in the capital, with good refreshments and a better view of Linjiang. Every early spring and late autumn, when the drizzle starts to fall, mist rises on the river, and the misty waves lean on the railing to listen to the rain, which is very popular among literati in Shanghai. In addition, every year in Shengyuan, official ships will set off fireworks on the Xianjiang River, and there is also a one-night fish and dragon dance scene of lights on both sides of the Xianjiang River. The location of Tingyulu is excellent, and it is the best place to watch the fire trees and silver flowers. No matter how high-ranking he is, it takes several months in advance to book this elegant seat on the riverside on Yuanyi night. Bai Minmin's private seat is on the third floor. It's not a big place, but it's very delicately arranged, and the view location is also considered good. But if we want to say the best, we still have to count the warm pavilion next to them in the middle. When the servant led Bai Minmin and Ming Tan upstairs, there were already 4 people sitting around the table in the warm room in the middle, chatting and drinking. The man sitting near the door is dressed luxuriously, and his whole body is of extraordinary quality. Of course, the most ostentatious thing was the suet white jade engraved with the word chapter on his waist. Zhang is the surname of the queen's mother's family. Anyone who has a little understanding of the family in the capital knows that the person who owns this jade can only be the younger brother of the current queen, Zhang Huiyu. At this moment, Zhang Huiyu sat casually at the table, playing with the wine glass in his hands, and teased the man in black beside him, "Your Highness, there is a lot of movement at the Chongming Palace banquet this time, and Miss Qunjin is full of affection." "Wrong payment, I heard it was a palace crying all the way out." The man in black didn't even lift his eyelids, but Liu Ting, who was sitting opposite him, asked calmly, "Is it Gu Jinsong's daughter?" Gu Jinsong is the name of Cheng Inho. Zhang Huiyu raised his eyebrows and nodded. A stern look flashed in Liu Ting's eyes, "There's still time for her to cry." Then he picked up the wine glass and drank it down. Compared with Zhang Huiyu's showy appearance and Liu Ting's fierceness, Xu Jingran, who is dressed in a brocade suit with moon and white cloud patterns, obviously has the gentle temperament of a handsome young man. Xu Jingran turned his jade finger, smiled and shook his head again, and said, "Actually, it's not a big deal to lose face, it's just that after doing this, the rumors of His Highness King Ding Bei's arrogance and domineering will spread to everyone in the streets and alleys before tomorrow. I know. At that time, if I want to find a good marriage again, I am afraid that the ladies in Beijing will be." Before the words fell, there was a slight squeak sound from outside, followed by the servant's indistinct voice, "Miss, please come inside." It seems that someone came from the private room next door. Xu Jingran stopped talking, and the others tacitly kept silent. "A Tan, sit down quickly. I asked them to prepare some refreshments, which are all your favorites. Oh, by the way, where did you just talk about?" Bai Minmin was able to talk, she never stopped talking all the way, from her own troubles to the palace banquet in Yongyuan. "The palace banquet, yes, it is the palace banquet. Your girl is really capable of breaking her mouth. How can Shen Hua climb up to the Ding Bei palace? Her brother Shen Yu was appreciated by the Ding Bei king, but she didn't appreciate her subordinates, so she sent her subordinates the reason why my younger sister married back to be a princess. What's more, Gujira was humiliated on the spot. Speaking of this, Gujira is really daring. His Majesty and Empress are all there. Why don't you express your admiration and present a song in public?" "Want." Gujira acted quite boldly, but His Royal Highness Ding Bei Wang is too rude and arrogant. With Bai Minmin, Ming Tan has always been relaxed, and with Lu guarding outside, she rested her chin. He disliked without any scruples. "A martial artist is crazy and vulgar, I don't think he is a kind person." Zhang Huiyu. Liu Ting. Xu Jingran. Vulgar martial artist himself also subconsciously paused. Ming Tan didn't notice it, he sipped his tea gracefully, and finally remembered the business. "By the way, have you found out what uncle's plan is these 2 days?" Bai Minmin always felt that she had forgotten something important, and now Ming Tan took the initiative to ask her to respond. "Oh, no. You also saw that day, my father's posture, wishing to pick up a kitchen knife and go to order the Duke's mansion murdered people, but Mr. Zhou persuaded him, and he was able to hold his breath these few days. I thought about it, and I probably wanted to wait for your father to return to Beijing before discussing it." Ming Tan frowned slightly when he heard the words. The reason why she knew about her fiancé-in-law's infidelity was because a few days ago she went to Changguo Duke's mansion to pay her respects to her ancestors, and was dragged by Bai Minmin to the study to find scriptures. She had already found the storybook, and before she didn't want to sneak away, her uncle Bai Jingyuan entered the study together with the guest, Mr. Zhou, and as soon as they entered the door, he became furious, smashed Fang Shanghao's ink's tone, and brought the 18 generations of the ancestors of the Duke of Ling to curse together, not giving them a chance to refuse to listen to the corner. He had an affair with his cousin and had an illegitimate child before the main family came in. This kind of nonsense is only done by the Liang family. The little turned himself into a relative of the emperor. It's not that the marriage was settled early, and the Liang family's stinky can't support the new wall, and they won't be able to reach a Tan in 8 lifetimes. Does he think that the Jing Anho's mansion is destroyed or the Changguo Duke's mansion is destroyed? It really makes no sense. Ming Tan and Bai Minmin were both stunned at the time, hiding in place for a long while without moving. After recovering, Bai Jingyuan and Mr. Zhou swept away from the study like a gust of wind. In fact, when she realized it right away, Bai Minmin was so angry that she wanted to go to her father Bai Jingyuan and ask him to immediately go to the Lingguo mansion to seek justice for Ming Tan. However, just as Mr. Zhou advised, this matter is not very honorable, and it is useless to make troubles greater than both sides. Moreover, Ming Tan's father was already on his way back to Beijing to report on his duties, so his uncle's rash appearance might be suspected of overstepping his position. He didn't realize that he forgot about it for a while before, but when he thought about it now, Bai Minmin was still furious. She ate 3 yuan of dim sum in one go, scolded Duke Dunling like her father, patted the table, and Ming Tan packed the ticket and said, "This is entirely the fault of his Liang family, how can his character be so bad? I can be a good match for you. Ah Tan, you don't have to worry, with my father here, this marriage will definitely be resolved. Of course I know that this person is unworthy, so I just cancelled the engagement." Ming Tan didn't go on, but Bai Minmin and the people next door knew very well that this world is especially harsh on women. No matter what the reason is, breaking the engagement will definitely damage the woman's reputation. Ming Tan paused, not knowing what came to mind, suddenly propped his chin closer, and asked tentatively, "Min, if you said that the engagement will be broken by then, how should I behave so that I can appear innocent and strong?" Innocent and strong. Bai Minmin put down her snack, and really thought about it carefully. "I remember that when the 5th girl from the Li family was divorced, she kissed her husband's family to cut off her will. There is also the 3rd girl from the Fang family in the east of the city. A brothel woman ransomed her body, and because she was pregnant, she was brought in as a good concubine, and when the 3rd girl of the Fang family heard about this, she hung a white silk from the beam of the house and hanged herself. It doesn't have to be so strong." Puff cough. Hearing this, Zhang Huiyu couldn't hold back his smile, took a sip of his wine, and coughed out of choking. But before he could recover, his eyes suddenly flickered, and then he felt a numbness in his neck and a congested throat. He wanted to open his mouth to speak, but he couldn't make any sound. Dumb hole. Although all the people present were practicing martial arts, the one who could do this without a trace, except for the of war beside him who made the barbarians of the northern region fearful, Ding Bei Wang Jiangxiu, didn't think about it at all. Zhang Huiyu widened his eyes, picked up the folding fan and pointed at Jiang Su, accusing. Jiang Su didn't avoid it, he just raised his eyelids and looked at him quietly. Those eyes seemed to sink into a lake of icy water, without any ripples, dark and cold. For some reason, Zhang Huiyu felt a chill down her spine, and put down her folding fan in the next second. Outside the window, the lanterns on both sides of the river are reflected on the river water, sparkling with sparkling light. The Nuan pavilion fell into silence again, only the folding fan pendant on the table was shining with candlelight, and the long tassels were shaking lightly. Min, did you hear something just now?" Ming Tan asked hesitantly. "Sound? What sound?" Bai Min looked blank. Ming Tan looked around, was silent for a while, then shook his head and said, "It seems that someone is coughing, maybe I heard it wrong." In fact, listening to the rain building has paid attention to sound insulation. The Nuon Pavilion next door is full of martial arts practitioners, so you can naturally hear the movement outside. But if you don't open the window to see the scenery tonight, you can't hear half of it with your bright sandalwood ears. Maybe it's a defensive feeling, or maybe it's because the important matter has been finished. The two of them will talk about boudoir topics afterwards, it's nothing serious. At the time of the garrison, the official ship stopped in the middle of the Xianjiang River, ready to set off fireworks. Bai Minmin stood by the window early on, and Ming Tan put aside the dignified and reserved attitude he usually pays attention to when he is outside. He lifted his skirt and stepped on the small steps by the window. The Shangyuan night in the capital is always lively and brilliant, as the so-called thaumaturgy and supernatural powers, singing and dancing, and all kinds of dramas are in touch with each other. On both sides of the Xianjiang River, the lights are brightly lit all night, and the people gather around to wait for the fireworks. There are also river lanterns floating out of the pier to pray for blessings. Looking from a distance, it is a scene of prosperity and prosperity. Amidst the cheers of the people on both sides of the strait, the fireworks of the official ships finally rose into the sky in clusters, and there were also rich families burning flames on the bank. For a while, the entire night sky seemed to be illuminated by this gorgeous light as if it were daytime. Ming Tan and Bai Minmin came from aristocratic families, they have seen many good things, but after all, they are 15 or 16-year-old innocent girls. At this moment they both hold their breath and open their eyes, refusing to blink for a moment. It's so beautiful. Ming Tan cupped his face and looked at the night sky, sighing softly. Bai Minmin nodded and said cheerfully, "I like the rabbit shape the most, it's so cute. I like the kind of golden fireworks sprinkled from time to time. The sound is delicate and very pleasant, like, look, it's coming again." The girl's soft and joyful voice not only attracted her companions to look around seriously, but also caused several people in the warm pavilion next door to unconsciously look out of the window. Jiang Su didn't move, he was still pouring wine for himself, but his position was facing the window, and when he looked up, he had a panoramic view of the dreamlike golden rain in the night. His eyes flickered slightly, and the jade liquid trickled down his throat without feeling spicy. The fireworks are beautiful, but short-lived. When the night sky returned to silence, Ming Tan stood by the window, didn't recover for a while, and even felt a little inexplicably melancholy. Fortunately, it was not too late. Bai Minmin wanted to go to Nanyuhi Street to have fun, and tried her best to encourage her to go with her. Her melancholy was quickly dispelled by Bai Minmin's description of the parade of floats and colorful lanterns. Before this, Ming Tan had never been to Nanyuhi Street on the night of lanterns in the Lantern Festival. This long street along the river is very lively and full of fish and dragons. Every year in the Yuan dynasty, women and children often have accidents in this area. Love let her girls set foot. The two carefully covered their veils, and when they got off the carriage, the lights were shining brightly and the bustle in front of them made Ming Tan dazzled for a moment. Bai Minmin, on the other hand, has adapted well because she sneaked here for several years in a row. She looked around, didn't know what she found, and suddenly let out a hey. "What's wrong?" Ming Tan asked. "It's nothing, it's just that I seem to have seen second Master Shu." Bai Minmin looked forward with a curious expression. The second son of Shu, Shu Jingran, is the son of the right Prime Minister. He is personable and has outstanding literary talent. Not a few women in the capital admire him. It is heard that he will also end in Chunwei this year. It is said that the second son of Shu is talented and good-looking, and he should be the best candidate for Jingqi Tan Hualan. Ming Tan also met Shu Er halfway from a distance. He is indeed a gentle and noble son like Hailan Yushu. If he didn't make the family of the Duke's mansion feel bad about the marriage, it would not be bad if he wanted to come to discuss marriage with the Shu family. Speaking of which, her divorce is a matter of time, and how to find a good relative again should be considered in advance. Ming Tan was walking, and Bai Minmin was surprised again. I'm not mistaken, Ah Tan, look, isn't that Lu Dian's Huai? Lu Dian's Huai is here, and the person with him must be second Master Shu. Ming Tan followed Bai Minmin's line of sight, and saw a tall man with a sword in front of him. A scar that was not deep and not shallow on his left forehead neatly stopped at the end of his brow. It is well known that Lu Ting, Xu Jingran, and Zhang Huiyu are friends. Before Ming Tan saw Xu Jingran who was with Lu Ting clearly, Bai Minmin couldn't wait to drag her forward to find someone. Hey, miss! The maidservant behind her came to her senses and hurriedly chased after her. The two walked very fast, but there were many people on the street, but in a blink of an eye, the people who were there before disappeared without a trace. Bai Minmin couldn't help feeling a little regretful for not being able to see the handsome man up close. However, she has a lot of playfulness, and was soon attracted by the various stalls set up by Lin He. For a while, I want to buy sweet cakes, and for a while, I want to buy fried chestnuts. The gadgets I bought are in my hands, and the food I bought has to lift the veil and stuff them into Ming Tan's mouth. Ming Tan has always been very particular about food and clothing. He would never dare to swallow these snacks on the street. You stuffed me to hide. The two of them laughed and made a fuss, which was very funny. How about it? This Nanyahi street is much more fun than the Daxiakuo temple with colorful sheds. Bai Minmin proudly asked Ming Tan for credit after setting off the river lantern by the pier. Ming Tan was about to respond when suddenly someone raised a folding fan in front of him and shouted, "Sister Tan?" Ming Tan thought for a moment that he was hallucinating. The man quickly stepped forward, proving with actions that she didn't. "Sister Tan, this is Sister Min." The visitor was handsome in appearance, wearing a jade-white brocade cloak with fine materials and exquisite patterns, and a crown of light golden hair. He looked like a nobleman. After seeing who it was, Bai Minmin wanted to step up and kick him, and said angrily, "Who is your sister?" The Duke of Ling's mansion is engaged to the Marquis of Jing'an's mansion, but they have no relationship with the Duke of Chang's, and Bai Minmin refuses to accept it. This Sister Min is indeed too close. The person who came did not argue, and hurriedly bowed his body and cupped his hands to show his apology for his abruptness. Bai Minmin knew that today was not the time to tear his face, but he still couldn't get over his anger, and wanted to stab him verbally. On the contrary, Ming Tan pulled her, tried hard to keep calm, and asked, "My lord, how did you recognize me?" He smiled lightly, shaking his folding fan and said warmly, "Sister Tan is a shining pearl, even though she covers her face with a light veil, she doesn't hide her brilliance." Ming Tan doesn't show it on the face, but in his heart he can't wait to slap him and tell him to speak human words. Strange to say, in the past she saw that her fiancé, Liang Zixuan, was also a good-looking person who was gentle and polite. Compared with Xu Er, although he was a little less elegant, he was also a rare good son-in-law. But looking at it now, she only felt that her eyes were replaced by blindness a few years ago. What kind of fan was she shaking in the cold weather? Words are so frivolous. Greasy. Pretentious. Su felt vaguely that Ming Tan's mood was wrong, and Liang Zixuan explained with a smile, "Actually, I saw the hairpin in Sister Tan's hair. Sister Tan seems to like this hairpin very much." Ming Tan didn't take over. Liang Zixuan paused for a moment, then talked to himself in order to hide his embarrassment. It's just that for some reason today, no matter what he said, Ming Tan remained indifferent, and the one from the Bai family even gouged him out from time to time. Could it be that? No, it's impossible. That matter has been kept strictly a secret. How could the Ming family and the Bai family know about it? If he knew, how could Duke Chong not bother the Duke's government with his short-cherished yet easy-going temperament? Thinking of this, Liang Zixuan felt a little relieved. But he also realized with hindsight how important the previous mother's explanation was. He likes his cousin who is weak and pleasant, but he has always regarded Ming Tan as his unmarried wife, and the Ming family and Bai family behind Ming Tan will be a great help in his future career, and this marriage must not be lost. Thinking of this, when I talked with my mother before, the disapproval of why is this finally came to an end. He turned his hands back calmly, and the folding fan tapped his wrist lightly. At the same time, as if nothing happened, he found another topic and continued to chat with Ming Tan unilaterally. Ming Tan was waiting for Lue and the guards to find him, as an excuse to go back to the house and get rid of Liang Zixuan's entanglement. After waiting for a long time, when she finally caught a glimpse of Lue, there was a commotion in the crowd in the distance. "Catch the thief! The one in front! Don't run!" Ming Tan followed the prestige, but before he could see clearly, there were two figures rushing towards the pier in the rioting crowd. Before he could react, he felt a thrust on. "Miss!" Accompanied by Bai Min and Lu not far away exclaimed, there was a plop falling into the water without warning. Liang Zixuan reacted very quickly, shouted Sister Tan, and anxiously took off his coat to save others. Lu stepped forward, seeing that it was the future son-in-law. Liashan Wazujian seemed to be grasping at straws, and hurriedly nodded and urged, "My lord, please help my young lady." Bai Min subconsciously grabbed Liang Zixuan, and shouted anxiously, "Don't go. No matter how playful she is also from a rich family. No one understands better than her. With Liang Zixuan's rescue, Ming Tan's life will be over for the rest of his life. Do you want to watch her die?" Liang Zixuan asked, and then threw Bai Min away regardless of the obstruction. Plop! There was another sound of falling into the water. Bai Min instantly felt cold hands and feet. She knows Ming Tan best. If she is rescued by Liang Zixuan in full view, it would be better to let her drown in this Xianjiang river. She stared at Jiang's face, forced herself to calm down, and arranged for the guard maid who came, "You stop the people who are watching the excitement, and no one is allowed to approach. You two go down and pull Liang Shizi away. And you two, do you know how to swim? Go down too, and bring A Tan up for me. I'm afraid it won't last long here. Lu, you go back immediately and bring more guards to help stop people." Yes. Spring had not yet begun, and the river water was bitingly cold, coupled with the bitter river wind blowing Hedan. Liang Zixuan found out that saving people was not as easy as he imagined, let alone saving people. He even Ming Tan I didn't see it anywhere. Not only did Liang Zixuan fail to see it, but the guards and maidservants arranged by Bai Min went into the water to search for a while, but there was no sign of him at all. The water at this pier is not too deep, and it is logically impossible to drown people silently in such a short period of time, but they are also sure that they didn't even see half of Ming Tan's clothes. It took about half an hour before the onlookers were forcibly stopped from the pier. It was only known that someone fell into the water, but the reason was unknown. Seeing this crowd of people blocking people, some idlers guessed that it was the ladies of the family, and they were all gearing up to get into the water, not sure if the opportunity came, they could still rely on the door for a good marriage. Seeing that it was about to be unstoppable, Bai Min was anxious and desperate in her heart. She only hated herself for coming up with the bad idea of visiting Nanyuhi Street. If something happened to Ming Tan, she, Bai Min, must be blamed for death. At this critical juncture, outside the crowd stopped by the guards, suddenly a man in a green shirt raised a handkerchief at Bai Min. "Miss Baiao, why are you still here? It's really easy for servants to find. My young lady cooked dumplings herself today. It's waiting for you to come over and taste it." The woman in the green shirt deliberately raised her voice. But the voice sounded gentle and clear, and quite familiar. Bai Min turned her head and was stunned for a moment. That was the most useful servant girl around Ming Tan, Sua Xin. Why is she here? Also, what did she just say? She, her lady? Sua Xin stepped forward, bowed to Bai Min in an orderly manner, and repeated the words that her young lady invited her to come over to taste Yuanzi. Seeing Liang Zixuan, who was already frozen behind Bai Minmin and being carried up by the guards, Sua Xin was slightly surprised and asked, "Did Liang Shizi fall into the water?" Bai Minmin couldn't react to the current situation, and didn't know what to do. It wasn't until she caught a glimpse of Lu, who was rushing back from behind, still out of breath, waving her hands non-stop, and mouthing "It's okay," that she suddenly understood something, as if she had opened up the two veins of Ren and Du. She hurriedly answered, "Yes, yes." Prince Liang fell into the water. Miss Ben happened to meet him while passing by, so she sent guards into the water to rescue him. Hey, it turned out to be a man. A big man has fallen into the water and needs to be rescued. What a loser. The surrounding area is so tight, what's the matter? It's gone, I thought it was the official lady. The onlookers waved their hands boredly, and soon dispersed. Liang Zixuan was shivering from the cold, unable to speak, but his eyes were full of disbelief. In fact, when they first fell into the water, Ming Tan and Liang Zixuan felt the same, only that the river water was icy cold and unbearable. She choked twice and struggled to cough for a while before realizing what happened. She was knocked overboard. In the compound of the deep house, there are countless accidents that happened because of the late marriage. Being in the same room when changing clothes after soiling them, and being rescued from falling into the water with skin-to-skin relatives, these two things are the most common. Mrs. Pei taught her how to guard against these secrets when she was outside, and even invited a female teacher to teach her how to drink water when she went to another village to escape the summer heat. Because she is not used at all on weekdays, and she has always been so delicate that she can sit in a soft sedan chair and never touch the ground. No one on the shore knows that she can swim. It's a pity that the timing was wrong. Liang Zixuan took off his coat and jumped down before Ming Tan had time to tell them. In desperation, she had no choice but to sink into the river, thinking of bypassing Liang Zixuan and going ashore from the other side of the pier. Such a hasty response was considered astute, but the river was too cold, and she was usually not a very active person. After swimming in the water for a while, she felt a sudden soreness in her lower body. The throbbing soreness, combined with the biting coldness of the river, was like a needle prick, leaving only a white light in front of her eyes, making it impossible for her to swim any further. At that moment, many thoughts flashed through Ming Tan's mind. For a while, I thought, let Liang Zixuan save it, it's better to die here to preserve the reputation, and then thought, forget it, let's ask for help, die here. The body is foaming and swollen. Move the beauty of Beijing. Just when she finished hesitating and decided to surface for help, a black belt suddenly pierced into the water without warning, quickly wrapped around her waist, and then tightened, pulling her to the shore and throwing her in the water. On the secluded reeds some distance from the pier. The force at the end of the belt was quick and sharp, without any sympathy. Ming Tan was thrown dizzily, and only vaguely glimpsed the half of the end of the black belt pulled from her waist. Judging by her experience of being pampered for more than 10 years, the material of the belt must be extraordinary, with delicate and complicated dark patterns on it. It seems to be made of black gold thread. The thread is extremely fine, and it still has a faint luster under the heavy night light. Before she followed the belt to see the person standing there, the robe fell down, covering her body and blocking her sight. And then? Bai Minmin hurriedly asked. Then, someone carried me back. Ming Tan leaned against the bed, pushed away the spicy cold soup, took the hand warmer handed by the maid, and recalled, I asked several times on the way, asked who are they, and where are they going to take me, but that person didn't make a sound, put me at the back door of the home mansion, and disappeared together with his robe. They? More than one. The person who rescued me and the one who sent me back are definitely not the same person. The clothes are very different, and the person who sent me back seems to be doing what he was ordered, like, following the guards. Bai Minmin digested it for a while, but still had a lot of questions. Wait, so you didn't say that you are from the Jing'an home mansion from the beginning to the end, but they sent you back to the home mansion accurately. Well, this is exactly what I find strange. Ming Tan sat up leaning on the pillow. If the purpose is impure, I checked it carefully after returning home, and I didn't lose any personal items. Those who have a plan must rely on faith. He didn't take it, that's really strange. Bai Min frowned and murmured. Okay, let's not mention this for now. Ming Tan thought of the more important things at the moment. How is Liang Zixuan now? What can he do? You sent Sua Xin over there, am I still so stupid that I can't catch up? Of course, he fell into the water, and I passed by and asked my followers to save him. Don't worry, I have already been sent away. He has returned to the Lingguo mansion. Hearing what Bai Min said, Ming Tan's hanging heart finally settled down. The public said that Liang Zixuan fell into the water, so no matter what happens afterwards, it can only be that Liang Zixuan fell into the water. After all, on the bright side, the in-law relationship between the two mansions is still very strong, and the accident of her unmarried eldest son's wife is not a credit to the Duke Ling's mansion. It's not going well, they can only acquiesce in this statement. Speaking of which, she always felt something strange about this matter today. At that time, someone rushed over to catch the thief, but compared to being bumped, she felt more like being pushed and suffered this crime. Thinking of this, she said, Min, go back and find someone to help me find out about the two people who bumped into me today. You suspect that falling into the water was not an accident? I just don't know, so I want to check it out. Bai Min nodded and responded readily. Seeing that Ming Tan's face was still pale, she tucked up the quilt for Ming Tan again, and took the dispelling cold soup from the handmaid's hand. Don't worry about this, come, drink the soup. The taste is too strong, Ming Tan doesn't want to drink it. Bai Min was also stubborn, she stuffed it into her mouth reluctantly, and muttered, drink it, don't think for yourself. Do you have to think for me? If you don't drink this soup, you will get a cold later. It's all my fault that I can't afford to sleep on the couch. You don't know my dad's bad temper, but you just have the heart to watch me being punished and kneel down in the ancestral hall? I'm afraid I can only. Ming Tan's brain ached from the chanting. He simply took the porcelain bowl, closed his eyes and swallowed it in one breath. Bai Min looked satisfied. Seeing that most of the time-keeping incense seals had been burned, she stood up and clapped her hands. In that case, you should rest well. It's getting late, so I'll go back home first. Sua Xin, Lue, take good care of your young lady. Sua Xin and Green Calyx all agreed, and respectfully sent Bai Min out of Zaya Shui Yuan. After all this tossing, Ming Tan's body was a bit unbearable, and he really needed a good rest. She didn't pay attention to the tedious maintenance before going to bed, she just applied some honeydew on her face, and soaked her hands in fresh goat's milk for a while. It rained lightly in the middle of the night, and the full moon was covered by thick clouds. Ming Tan was already asleep under the brocade quilt, and the entire Jing'an home mansion was also immersed in the dim light of the dense rain. Dali Temple Prison, the dungeon down the stairs is spacious and dark, and the oil lamps are lighted every 10 steps, which still can't hide the gloomy and lonely. Si Cheng walked in front and bowed to lead. My lord, second young master Shu, this way please. Shu Jingran has always been noble and elegant. This is the first time he came to this prison, and the depressive and corrupt atmosphere around him made him extremely uncomfortable. He glanced at Jiangsu, thinking that the days of licking blood from the edge of a knife on the battlefield were 100 times worse, so he was able to move forward indifferently with his hands behind his back. He sighed, and hurriedly covered his nose to follow. In the interrogation office, the instruments of torture hanging on the wall glowed with a faint cold light, and the person awaiting trial had already been tied to the rack by the jailer. Probably before he was executed, this person described himself as a mess, but upon closer inspection he was unharmed. Si Cheng opened the armchair for Jiangsu and respectfully invited him to take a seat. Jiangsu didn't give way, and sat down straight with his hem lifted, and tapped the armrest with his fingertips, expressionless, looking at the execution rack in the dark. "My lord, my lord!" The people on the rack saw the person coming, and fear welled up in their hearts. "Why, lord, why did you arrest this little minister here?" The little minister was wronged. Wronged? Jiangsu turned his head and looked directly at him. "You can wait a little longer, and when Marquis Cheng En is also in prison, you can also call him wronged." Cheng En Ho. The blood of the person on the rack froze instantly. In fact, as early as when he was arrested for no reason on his way back home, and no one explained to him why the arrest started, he had a vague premonition. But he has been unwilling and afraid to think about that. After all, if it is really related to Cheng En Ho, it will be a disaster for him. Although Xiao Chen has contacts with Lord Ho, but... Zhang Ji, I think you are a smart person, so I can guarantee that you are still full of beards and tails. Are you sure you want to go around in circles with me? Jiangsu got up, walked towards him slowly, and turned his head to look at him. Probably because of being in the dungeon, the faint hostility of conquest and killing spread from him, carrying a very heavy pressure. The voice is not high, but it makes people feel cold for no reason. Zhang Ji opened his mouth and was suppressed for a moment. He knew that this was the beginning of the liquidation, and he also knew that Jiangsu had come here for this purpose, and the deadly silence spread with the rotten atmosphere of the dungeon. For a long while, he hesitated and wriggled his lips, still unwilling to give up trying to win something for himself. "I do have some things that the prince can use in my hands. If the prince agrees to one condition, I will." He didn't say anything. After that, he let out a sudden pain. Xu Jingran was taken aback, only to realize that the torture blade with the barb on the wall had somehow avoided the vitals and pierced Zhang Ji's waist and abdomen. Tick-tock on the dirty dark floor. "What qualifications do you have to negotiate terms with this king?" Jiangsu leaned forward, whispered into Zhang Ji's ear, and asked casually. He didn't let go of the handle, the barb was sticking to the flesh and blood, and he was still pushing it in inch by inch, repeatedly twisting and turning. Zhang Ji's face was pale with pain, and beads of sweat stood on his forehead. After all, he was a person who hadn't suffered much, rolled his eyes and passed out in less than half a moment. Jiangsu stood up straight and let the jailer pour cold water on Zhang Ji to wake him up. The stove beside the punishment wall was also lit, and the iron was burning red. Zhang Ji had just recovered his sanity when he saw the jailer approaching him with the iron, not allowing him to stop, and the iron went straight to the wound just now. There was another heart-piercing scream. There are various instruments of torture in the prison. Zhang Jike peed in his pants after 2 tortures, and he was full of shame. He regretted that he didn't drink the toast first, and shouted hoarsely, "My lord! My lord, I say!" Marquis Cheng En seized the farm and opened a salt mine privately. The evidence is on the outskirts of the city, my private house in Julapo. It's buried under the apricot tree in the backyard. At midnight, the dungeon door opened. After leaving Dali prison, Xu Jingran finally exhaled foul air. Su Shi had a light rain, and he felt that the atmosphere in Beijing tonight was exceptionally clean. Just thinking back to the scene in the dungeon just now, when Jiangsu stabbed the barbed torture blade into Zhang Ji's waist without blinking, and then spun it inch by inch, he always felt that he would have nightmares tonight. But having said that, His Royal Highness King Dingbei is notoriously cruel and ruthless. Thinking back to when the Minister of the Household Department corrupted the army's salary and delayed the military plane, he returned from the Shura field. He should not be ordered not to enter the palace. The first thing he did was to take the head of the corrupt official. His wife knew that she had no life to live, so in order to protect the beautiful twins in the family, she asked the twin daughters to serve as slaves by her side. With such an alluring look, it is reasonable to say that a man would be tempted, and to keep 2 women, for him, he can make sure with just a few fingers. But he was unmoved, ransacked the house according to the law, destroyed the family and beheaded, leaving no one behind. So, back to the river, why did you save Miss Ming's family, and let the hidden guards send her back to the Ho's mansion, pity the fragrance and cherish the jade? It's not like what you would do, Kizzy. He thought that Jiangsu's return to Beijing changed his mind and developed a heart of compassion. After walking around in the dungeon, he realized that he was thinking too much. Recalling the corner he accidentally heard in Tingyu building, he smiled again. Could it be that you fell in love with that Miss Ming family at first sight? Jiangsu lowered his eyes, pulled his lips, wiped the blood on his hands slowly, and said unhurriedly, as expected of Mr. Shu Er, who is famous in Beijing, he is really gentle and affectionate. The 5 years of Chen Kang's Shang Yuan passed away without any risk in the hustle and bustle, and the taste of the year also quietly dissipated with the fading winter snow. The two who knocked Mington into the water haven't found out yet, but fortunately, the Duke's mansion was savvy and directly accepted the statement that Liang Zixuan fell into the water, and even let Liang Zixuan lie in the mansion for a few days, all of which were covered. Mrs. Pei didn't know the inside story, but felt that Duke Ling's mansion was quite kind, and he was a friendly family. Ming Tan didn't appreciate it, and ordered the government to send people to greet and give gifts in private, but she didn't pay much attention. At the beginning of spring, the tailor Zai Yuniang of Jingxi Yufang was invited to the Jing'an Ho mansion to make tailor-made clothes. Ming Tan planned ahead, and thought that it would be inconvenient to publicize for a long time after the divorce, so this time he chose some simple and elegant colors, moon white, moxa green, and light blue. Mrs. Pei thought she was looking fresh, so she didn't stop her. She just pointed out 2 more brightly colored horses to make her a coat, and put a pillow on it and said kindly, "It's okay to be plain and clean in the mansion on weekdays, but this spring day is indispensable. Going out to enjoy the flowers, the girls' clothes should be fresher, lively, and in good spirits. Who would not like it?" Mother said so. Ming Tan didn't delay much, and obediently agreed, but he was annoyed that Chun Ri couldn't wear these beautiful clothes and go out to show off. Pei's family will never fall into the shoes of others when it comes to trivial matters such as food and clothing, and has added rules to Ming Tan, and also added an extra share to Shen Hua. Putting aside the froth and taking a sip of tea, she thought of something, and explained to the woman in charge of Jingxi Yufang, the remaining few horses will be made according to the figure of the young lady. Counting the time, the third lady will be back soon. I haven't seen you for a few years, and I don't know what my body looks like now, so I have to prepare first, and if it doesn't fit, I will make a fit when I return to Beijing. Yes. The woman in charge accepted the errand, but she was wondering in her heart whether the fineness of these bodies should be done like the little lady. After all, she often walks in the compound of the deep house, so she cannot even notice the subtle changes of the Madame Ho in front of her. In fact, it wasn't just Pei's subtle attitude. Ming Tan and Shen Hua were also stunned for a moment when they heard Miss 3. The Jing'an Ho mansion has always been full of yang and yin, and in Ming Tan's life, the number of girls can be counted on one hand. When the old lady was alive, she hadn't been separated from her family for a few years, and her cousins had arranged their teeth together. There is no direct sister in Mington. The 2 cousins of the second and third bedrooms are all married. Ming Chu, the concubine, is still in her boudoir, and she is about the same age as her. It's just that Ming Chu and Aunt Lu accompanied her father, Marquis Jing'an, to guard the border and hadn't returned to Beijing for 5 years. Previously, Ming Tan only remembered that her father would return to Beijing, and the matter of retiring could be put on the agenda, but he forgot that Ming Chu and Aunt Lu would also come back together. She and Ming Chu had a very bad relationship in the past, and when she came back now, wouldn't it be one more person who saw her jokes when she retired? As for Shen Hua, the first thing that comes to my mind is Ming Chu, Miss Mingson, who is the same age as her. Although she is a concubine, she has a high family background and is favored, and her status is comparable to her. There are many suitable marriages in Beijing now. When they return to Beijing at this time, the 2 of them are afraid that they will bump into each other in discussing marriage. For a while, Several people in the hall were silent, their eyes lowered in thought. Seeing that the return date was approaching, Mrs. Pei ordered the Jingxi Yu Fang to prepare clothes, and at the same time ordered the servants to tidy up the Ho's mansion. She was very appropriate in managing the household. Within a few days, the entire Ho mansion had been cleaned up, even Aunt Liu's yard had been refurbished, and she couldn't find any faults. Seeing Mrs. Pei being so caring, Mama Zhang couldn't help nagging when she combed her hair. "Madam, why bother to take care of Mrs. Liu's place? The one who didn't make it to the public has occupied Lord Ho for 5 years. Now I'm afraid it's the same." Very frivolous. Pei looked at the still beautiful and elegant face in the mirror, and responded. There was no one around, and Zhang's mother leaned closer and whispered, "In the final analysis, the heirs are the most important thing in this house. Madam, it is difficult, but there are no beautiful girls in the mansion. Otherwise, there are many small families in Beijing. Master Ho has been with the Liu family for so many years, and he should get tired of seeing new ones." Mrs. Pei picked up the hairpin and stroked it on her head, with a look of indifference. "Ma'am!" Mother Zhang couldn't help shouting. Pei glanced slightly at the end of his eyes, and said in a low voice, "You are right." She put down her hairpin, and her gaze became deep and far away. "My relationship with Lord Ho is nothing more than that. When I was appointed as a foreigner, it was because I didn't want to suffer the hardships of the border and asked me to stay in Beijing. I should thank Mrs. Liu for being the one. After 5 years at the border, Master Ho has not accepted any newcomers, let alone a son and a half-daughter. This has saved me a lot of trouble, and I have changed to another concubine to accompany me. I think I am not as capable as her. Let's talk about heirs. I don't have the fate to be around me. It's impossible to take care of raising a young one, not to mention it, but it is absolutely impossible to inherit the title. Instead of such twists and turns, it's better to spend more time on Atan. After all these years, you should also understand that half of the future of our Ho's mansion lies in marrying a daughter, and the other half is with the elder brother. When I married into the Ho's mansion, the elder brother was already too old to raise a mother and child. Relatives, but all these years because of Atan, he has not lacked respect for me. Mother Zhang agrees with this point very much. My eldest brother has been working in Pengshan for the past few years, and he has never lost his etiquette in letters. Knowing that his wife has an old problem of knee pain, he even brought back the folk prescription from Pengshan. Although there is no big, he is talented, but he is polite and affectionate. Thinking of this, Mrs. Pei curled her lips in satisfaction. After a while, she suddenly remembered something, and asked again, "By the way, Atan has been a little unusual recently?" When she entered the palace a few days ago, she stared at the Liang family's female family members for a long time. She behaved very well outside. I wouldn't be so rude. And Yuan Xi fell into the water. Later, the Liang family gave gifts and cared, and she was also indifferent, as if she was not happy. Mother Zhang said, "Mrs. Young, so the Liang family is the first baby relative. The two families have little contact on weekdays, and it is normal to be curious. As for the Liang family's concern about gifts, it will be favored by the future husband's family. The head must be happy, but the daughter's face is too thin to show it." Pei still felt something was wrong, but didn't say anything more. Compared with the fact that the Jing and Ho mansion is waiting for the head of the family to return to the capital, the nobles in Beijing are more concerned about another major event that suddenly broke out without warning. Gu Jinsong, the Marquis of Chang'an, forcibly occupied the farm and opened the salt mine privately, committing several crimes simultaneously. The noble concubine Yu Gaifei, who has always been favored, was also imprisoned because of her involvement in the case. Fortunately, the crime is not as good as the family members. Except for those involved, the rest are only demoted to common people, and men are not allowed to enter the imperial examination. When everyone talked about this matter, they couldn't help but sigh. Being relegated to common people and failing to enter the imperial examination, there is no hope for the Gu family to recover within 3 generations. Bai Minmin sighed. Gujira also boldly presented music at the Shang Yuan Palace banquet. It's only been a few days, how could it be so sudden? Zhou Jingguan, the daughter of Hanlin scholars who had good friends with Ming Tan and Bai Minmin, said softly, it's not sudden. That day I rested at home due to the cold and didn't go to the banquet. Later, I heard about the things in the palace. The situation in the palace at that time was actually quite a lot of things have been foreshadowed. Ming Tan has already figured out the joints. What Zhou Jingguan said was exactly what she meant. Only Bai Minmin was at a loss. Aden, do you understand? Why didn't it happen suddenly, why did it foreshadow? Ming Tan didn't bother to explain, and pushed the stack of walnuts on the table in front of her. Eat more, nourish your brain. Bai Minmin reached out and hit her. Ming Tan hurriedly hid, but reservedly said with disgust, look at you, you don't have the slightest bit of virtuousness and chastity between me and Wan Wan. How can you win the reputation of 3 sisters of Shangjing? Never mind being Wan Wan, what do you have to do with Xianxia Zhenjing? You will only pretend in front of outsiders, and speak boldly. Ming Tan, that's better than you can't pretend in front of outsiders. Okay. Zhou Jingguan smiled lightly, she was always weak, and her voice was soft and soft. Stop bickering, I'll say it. The 3 of them sat and tasted tea by the patio of Zaya Shui Yuan. They were all their own people inside and out, so there was nothing they couldn't say. Zhou Jingguan explained patiently, this incident happened, on the surface, it is said that Zhang Ji, the magistrate of Jingji County, had a close relationship with Cheng Inho, and he collected a lot of criminal evidence of Gu's family in private. But think about it carefully, Zhang Ji is because of Cheng Inho. Inho is a talented official, so why did he suddenly report? Is there really a corrupt official who will abandon evil and do good overnight? Furthermore, in the past, the censor impeached Marquis Cheng En, but the Holy Majesty always lightly exposed it. But this time he was furious during the court and ordered a thorough investigation. Hearing this, Bai Minmin seemed to vaguely understand something. Zhou Jingguan stopped short, then changed the topic and continued, the king of Dingbei often goes to the north and rarely returns to the capital. I don't know much about his temperament. But even if he is really self-respecting, he won't let concubine Yugui and Marquis Qinzhen go. In my eyes, if you directly disrespect others at the palace banquet, your majesty and empress will take light responsibility. Oh. I understand. Bai Minmin calmed down his thoughts, you mean, his majesty wanted to clean up the Gu family a long time ago, so the scene was so ugly that he and the empress didn't say anything for Gujira. Then if you think about it that way, His Royal Highness King Dingbei is very likely to have known His Majesty's intentions a long time ago, so he is so presumptuous. In my opinion, that His Highness is just that presumptuous. A reckless man, what can he know? Ming Tansi died Danko gracefully, a little bit disregarded. The days passed without rush, and soon on the 8th day of February, Jing and Homing Tinjai-yuan, who was appointed as the Commander-in-Chief of West Yangtze Road, returned to Beijing after his full term. He is in charge of the military and political power, and has made outstanding achievements in office. His return to Beijing to report on his duties is related to the change of senior officials in the court, and many people are secretly paying attention. Emperor Chengkong passed down an oral order, ordering the Marquis of Jing'an to face the saint immediately when he entered Beijing. After entering the city, Ming Tingyuan separated from his family and servants, headed straight to Kixuan Gate, and detoured all the way to Jing'an Ho's mansion on Nank Street. Hearing that Lord Ho went straight into the palace without passing through the house, and it was Aunt Lu who came back first, the people in the Ho's mansion slowed down a lot. After all, there are no rules in this world to welcome aunts and concubines back to the mansion with great fanfare. When Aunt Lu and Ming Chu got out of the car, only Mama Zhang, who was with Mrs. Pei, led a few maids to wait at the corner gate. Perhaps it was because of the unique grace that she stayed in Yangtze Road and other places near the bitter cold of Xinjiang for 5 years. Aunt Liu's appearance was the same as before, and she even added a bit of brilliance. Ming Chu, the third lady, is hard to recognize at a glance. She was only 11 or 12 years old when she left Beijing. 5 years later, her appearance has grown, and her temperament is also very different from before. She has a bit of the sassy demeanor of a general and a tiger girl. You let my mother and I enter through the corner door. Ming Chu frowned, dissatisfied with Zhang's mother's arrangement. You must know that on Yangtze Road, no matter where she goes, she is the jewel in the palm of Shui, and no one treats her poorly. However, this choice is very unreasonable. This is Shangjing. How can the gate be opened indiscriminately? Even the Pei family enters and exits through the corner gate on weekdays. Of course, if they go back to the mansion with Lord Ho today, they will indeed have the honor of entering through the main entrance. Mama Zhang was about to explain, when Aunt Liu stepped forward to hold Ming Chu's hand and tightened it calmly. Thinking of Aunt Liu's reminder on the way back to Beijing, Ming Chu froze, and decided to hold back for now. She pulled her face past Zhang's mother and stepped straight into the corner door. At the same time, Ming Tan was losing his temper in Zhao Shui courtyard. She slapped the letter paper in her hand on the table, and couldn't help but sweep off the exquisite teacups and teapots on the table. The sound of porcelain breaking was sudden and crisp. She patted the table and got up suddenly. While circling in the room, she muttered, "You're a scum, it's just a scum. I thought this family was just unruly and shameless, but I underestimated them. It was calculated on Miss Ben's head." Her voice trembled with anger. After the 10 fingers were clenched tightly, the knuckles turned white, and the light blue meridian was faintly visible on the back of the hand. Sui Xin and Lue are quite frightened. The key is that they don't know what happened yet. Obviously, the ladies of their family have been full of fighting spirit these 2 days, and they are going to dress up and overwhelm the third lady who is returning home today. This morning, I asked someone to take the morning dew from the flowers and apply it thickly with the jade powder. It is said that after washing the face like this, the skin will be extraordinarily smooth and bright. But just after breakfast, the maidservant of the Bai mansion sent a letter saying that Bai Minmin wanted to come and tell her what was in the letter in person, but thinking that it is not appropriate to come to the home mansion for a reunion today, he had to write a letter and ask someone to send it. I don't know what was written in the letter, but it made the little lady of the Ming family who always said no matter what happens to a famous lady, don't lose her manners. What's the difference between shouting and throwing things, and a crazy woman in the market? Madness. Thinking back to the Golden Chrysanthemum banquet the year before last, Princess Feng Zhao came out halfway to take away the position of Flower Lord that she should have held securely. When she came back, she just dropped a porcelain cup, and she threw it on the imperial concubine's couch. Did not knock. But this time, after dropping the tea bowl and porcelain pot, she walked around the house a few times, and suddenly rushed out with the letter. Seeing this posture, Sui Xin, who has always been stable, panicked, and hurriedly chased to remind, "Miss, where are you going? Third Miss and Auntie have already entered the house, and you haven't worn your new hairpin yet." Ming Tan paused. "Right. Hairpin. And that mother and daughter." She turned around, walked all the way into the inner room, and sat back in front of the dowry with no expression on her face. Sui Xin bumped into Lue lightly, and Lue was a little confused. She stammered a few times before reacting, "Little Miss, don't be angry. Once you get angry, you are not beautiful anymore." "It's not that you are not beautiful, Miss is beautiful no matter what, but when Miss laughs, she is even more overwhelming, and turning all living beings upside down." I don't know if it's Lu's compliment, or looking at his own face and calming down. After Ming Tan sat down, he calmed down a lot. Her father was entering the palace to meet the saint, and now he rushed out to find no one to tell, and made people laugh for no reason. Besides, when her father came back, she couldn't just rush forward and shout for divorce. They haven't seen each other for 5 years. Who knows how much Ming Chu and Aunt Lu have given her father a bad wind. If there is a misunderstanding at that time, it is because of her lack of etiquette that the Duke of Ling's government despises her, and it will be a bad thing. Furthermore, she wasn't too sure that the father who treated her well in his memory, but he didn't hurt his bones like her uncle treated Bai Min Min, would be willing to offend Duke Ling for her. She picked up the newly made silver moon tassel hairpin on the table, looked at it for a while, and suddenly ordered, "Sua Xin, take a plain handkerchief and soak it in some garlic juice." "Yes. One more thing, come here." She motioned Sua Xin to come closer, put the letter sent by the maid in the White House back into an envelope, handed it to her, and whispered a few words in her ear. Sua Xin has always been the master who doesn't say anything, so she doesn't ask too much. After answering the errand, she bowed down. Ming Tan breathed a sigh of relief, and then ordered Lue, "Redress me, don't be too grand, and change clothes." Previously, she only thought about how to overwhelm Ming Chu, but forgot that meeting her father was the more important thing. So under her repeated pickiness and guidance, Lu finally arranged her into a delicate appearance. She stared at the bronze mirror that was as tall as a person for a while, and bent the corners of her lips in satisfaction. "Let's go to Langzhen Yuan." Langzhen Courtyard is Pei's courtyard. From Zhao Shui Courtyard, you have to go through corridors and walls, and you have to pass through the garden of Donghua Courtyard. A group of people went forward along the Chao Shao corridor, and as soon as they reached the garden of Donghua Yuan, they heard a noise ahead. "Oh, it's the granddaughter of the old lady's natal brother. How long has the old lady been here, and the relationship is really far away. And if I remember correctly, the old lady's natal family was originally an uncle's house, and she has been downgraded to the rank of noble. There is nothing to surrender. I haven't been in touch with our family for many years, I'm a serious relative." Ming Chu mocked. "Shen Hua, third sister, you. What are you, cousin? I called you cousin because of the old lady who has gone. You really don't treat yourself as an outsider. My mother and I just returned home, and we met you reading something sour in this garden. Poetry, don't you mean to create trouble for me and my mother? If you want me to say, you should also do your part when you are under the fence." Ming Chu was originally unhappy because he entered the mansion through the corner gate, and the servants he met along the way were far less thoughtful and attentive than those on Yangtze Road, and when Shen Hua was reciting some poems hurting spring in the garden, her evil fire I couldn't hold it in any longer, the words I said were full of irony, and my tone was full of unreasonable and unforgiving arrogance. Shen Hua was extremely angry. In the past, she and Ming Tan were often annoyed at the slightest sign of separation, but Ming Tan is a noble girl from a famous family. She can hide a needle in her cotton. How could she be so vulgar, rude, and without ladylike demeanor? She was about to open her mouth to block back, when suddenly another teasing voice came from behind. "Third sister, please be careful, mother is in Langzhen Courtyard, but not here." Both Zhili and Li turned their heads subconsciously. I saw a group of green-clothed maidservants walking towards the corner of the veranda. After walking for a while, the group of maidservants stopped and spontaneously lined up in 2 rows, bowing their heads respectfully. A girl in a brocade dress embroidered with jade white gold silk embroidered steps forward. She has snow-skinned black hair, her pupils are watercut, and she gently shakes a fan with her slender hands. Every time she takes a step forward, the silver moon tassel hairpin in her hair twitches. Gently shakes out a fine-grained luster. It is obviously not a very gorgeous dress, but when viewed from a distance, it has a delicate feeling like a precious porcelain vase, which is afraid of falling on the ground and afraid of breaking in the palm of the hand. It is so beautiful that people can't take their eyes off it. Even if Shen Hua had seen this scene a lot, she was stunned for a moment before recovering. For a moment, she didn't know whether to mock Ming Tan's pretentiousness secretly in her heart as usual, or to thank her for her pretentiousness for shocking a shrew who didn't know what a boudoir is like. "This is the 4th miss. Aunt Lu quickly recognized Ming Tan, smiled gently, and said softly, I haven't seen you for a few years, and the fourth miss is really beautiful now. The main reason why she couldn't stop Ming Chu before was because she didn't take Shen Hua too seriously. But Mington is different. If Mington wants to talk about this title, he will go to Pei's face. 9 can't ask for good. Auntie praises it a lot. I see, the third sister is also coming out now. It's not the same as those of us girls who have lived in Beijing for a long time. Ming Tan responded to Aunt Liu's words, but didn't give Aunt Lu a look, just looked at Ming Chu contemptuously from top to bottom as she just looked at Shen Hua clearly. After knowing it clearly, I came back to my senses. You. What are you, third sister? This is Shang Jing, pointing at people to talk, but it is very indecent. Ming Tan pressed down her fingers slowly with a fan. Third sister has not returned to Beijing for a long time. I think she has forgotten a lot of rules like today. I don't know where my mother is, disrespecting my cousin who came from afar, not pity my younger sister, and just making a scene outside. It's enough to be laughed at for half a year. It's the third sister who should be responsible, right? Ming Chu was blocked by what he said before, and was burning with anger, staring at Mington. His eyes were about to spit fire. Seeing that she was about to pull out the soft whip around her waist, Aunt Lu hurriedly stepped forward to hold her down, and shouted softly, Choo choo. Ming Chu stared at the girl in front of him, and the word bitch came to his lips, but for some reason, he finally swallowed it back. Her mother was right, no matter what she had to wait until after the marriage was engaged. Pei Shi was her aunt. If she caught her wrong and made a big fuss, it would be too uneconomical for her to get in the way when she was negotiating marriage. After persuading Ming Chu, Aunt Lu forced a smile again, and looked at Mington. Miss Si, she is Chu Chu. Ming Tan was too lazy to listen, so he interrupted directly, it's getting late, I still have to greet my mother, so I won't accompany you any longer. Seeing this, Shen Hua followed, fourth sister, I'll be with you. She has never liked Ming Tan, but today, under the background of Ming Chu, she feels that this archenemy looks a lot better. Or as the saying goes, the wicked have their own grind. These 4 younger sisters of hers can choke people, one mouth is indecent, one mouth is polite, and they are charged with the crime of not pity the younger sister. They are only 1 year younger, no matter how young they are, they put gold on their faces, it's also really natural. But after a while, Shen Hua felt that she was wrong. Compared with putting gold on her own face, the singing skills of the little lady of the Ming family can kill famous actors in the Fuchin class. After they arrived at Mrs. Pei's place, they sat there for a short time, when someone came in outside and spread the word that Master Ho had returned to his residence and was heading to Langzhen courtyard. Everyone stood up to greet each other. Shen Hua inadvertently caught a glimpse of Ming Tan taking Fang Supa from his wide sleeve and pressing his eyes, then his eyes turned red and tears glistened. Shen Hua was thinking about it, but she didn't realize that she had any deep father-daughter affection for the Marquis of Jing'an on weekdays. Then she saw her holding her skirt and pounced on the tall, short-bearded Zhong who had just walked into the courtyard. The young man was still calling daddy repeatedly. Ming Tan's voice is soft and clean, with a bit of pretended forbearance crying, which can make people want to protect. Sure enough, after not seeing his little daughter for 5 years, Ming Ting Yuan, who should have been hard to recognize his face immediately patted Ming Tan's thin shoulders, and comforted him in a rough voice, "Daughter, what's the matter? Isn't it being bullied?" Ming Tan lifted his small head, with red eyes, shook his head and said, "No, it's A Tan who misses daddy so much." But as soon as he finished speaking, tears flowed down his eyes. She hurriedly wiped it with a handkerchief, then reluctantly took a half step back. Fuxian said, "A Tan has seen daddy, it is A Tan who lost his composure, and forgot the rules of etiquette for a while, please punish daddy." Ming Ting Yuan was very pleased. The little girl he hasn't seen for 5 years, she is filial and sensible, well behaved, and the key is that she looks like a fairy. she is indeed his Ming Ting Yuan's girl. The warm scene outside the house was staged here, and Mrs. Pei just happened to lead the people in the house to welcome them out. Mrs. Pei called Master Ho, helped Ming Tan up, and said with a warm smile, "I haven't seen you for 5 years, Ah Tan misses Lord Ho so much," she cried like a little cat. Ming Ting Yuan touched Ming Tan's head, and laughed loudly, "I see Madam raised this little cat very well." The smile on Pei's face deepened. She was about to answer something when suddenly someone broke into the courtyard and shouted abruptly, "Daddy!" It is clear. She was still wearing the red dress, and she went up and hugged Ming Ting Yuan's arm, and said coquettishly, "Father, you are back at last, you brought Ah Fu and the others with you when you entered the palace, no one will practice whipping with your daughter." Ming Chu's set is very useful for Ming Tingjai Yuan on weekdays. After all, he was living in a remote area, and there was only such a daughter by his side, so it was natural to see what he wanted. But now, he subconsciously looked at the little daughter in front of him. I saw his well-behaved and sensible little daughter staring at the arm that Ming Chu was hugging, startled for a moment, then lowered her eyelashes silently, as if trying to hide the disappointment in her eyes. There was a burst of inexplicable emotions in his heart. Looking at the embarrassment that was suddenly interrupted on Pei's face, he was also inexplicably uncomfortable. "What are you doing? Nonsense, you don't even salute your mother." Ming Chu was stunned. Going to Beijing is not as easy as you can do in other places. Girls, you should calm down. What kind of whip are you practicing? Learn more rules from your mother and sister when you have time. When Aunt Lu heard this at the gate of the courtyard, she paused. Earlier, she went back to her own yard to rest, so she wanted to bring Ming Chu to greet Mrs. Pei, but in the middle of the journey, when the servants said that Master Ho had returned to the mansion and was going to Langzhenyuan, Ming Chu sped up angrily. Step! She wanted to catch up, but Ming Chu had learned three-legged cat kung fu for a few years, and she walked much faster than ordinary women. When she rushed to Langzhenyuan, she just heard Ho Yi's reprimand. She regained her composure, stepped forward and knelt down and said, "I have met Lord Ho, and Madam." Ming Chu was immersed in the grievance that her father had scolded her, and was dragged by Aunt Lu, so she reluctantly added a blessing, "I have met my father, I have seen my mother." Family, don't be too polite. Mrs. Pei can best show the gentleness and generosity of the mistress at this time. Since the Marquis is back, don't stand here anymore, let's go in and set the meal. This lunch was served in the second room of the main room of Langzhen courtyard, and the dishes were well prepared. Stewed deer tendon, crystal elbow, pork ribs and lotus leaf, lotus tofu, meat and vegetables are all available. Since entering the house, Aunt Lu has been standing by the side obediently, adding vegetables to Mrs. Pei's soup. Mrs. Pei asked her to rest, but she lowered her head and said cautiously, "Serving the Lord and Madam is the duty of a concubine." Ming Ting was far silent, but he was obviously quite satisfied with her actions. Just now he was outside thinking that he shouldn't have taken Ming Chu to Yangtze Road back then, and was spoiled by Aunt Lu so much that he lost all manners. Now that he thinks about it, Aunt Lu is actually doing his duty, mainly because of Ming Chu's temper. Few people can manage it. Everyone was silent. Even the maids in this house are all elites who have experienced many years in the deep mansion, and no one except Ming Ting Yuan would take Aunt Liu's attitude seriously. Of course, Ming Chu still felt aggrieved for her aunt sincerely. After all, in the past on Yangtze Road, they were a family of 3 eating together, but now it's good that they can't just sit down and eat, but they have to serve that woman who occupies the position of mistress and can't lay eggs. Just thinking of this, Ming Chu felt that all the delicacies in front of him lost their taste. But at this time, Ming Tan also gave Ming Ting Yuan a piece of stewed deer tendon. "Daddy, try it." Not to mention how the deer tendon tastes, Ming Ting Yuan is very satisfied with the movements of pressing her sleeves, changing the chopsticks, and silently putting the deer tendon into the small dish beside the bowl without dipping half of the sauce when pinching the deer tendon. He is a vulgar person with extremely limited literary talent and taste, but this does not prevent him from liking to pursue literature and appreciate elegance. If not, he would not be partial to the most talented Aunt Lu among the few concubines. Seeing that it was his daughter who was so generous and elegant, he felt a sense of comfort and pride in his heart. After tasting the deer tendon, he nodded and praised repeatedly, it's soft and delicious, and it tastes good. As long as Daddy likes it." Ming Tan smiled and rolled his eyes. "Why don't you like this stewed deer tendon, but A Tan specially made it for Lord Ho." Mrs. Pei also added a piece to Ming Ting Yuan. "The deer tendon is extremely hard to soften, it is said that it will be hammered a few days ago, boil, simmer with broth, and then simmer again with chicken broth that has been hanging for a day. The broth and chicken broth used for simmering are also very particular. Carefulness." Ming Ting Yuan ate the piece of Pei's pinch again, and felt deeply moved. A Tan has been well behaved and filial since he was a child. Of course, it is also thanks to his wife's careful upbringing all these years. As he said, he made a pearl ball for Ming Tan and Pei Shi. "Don't patronize me, this dish is beautiful, you should try it too." "Thank you, Daddy." "Thank you, Lord Ho." Ming Chu. Only ghosts believe that Miss Jiao, who doesn't touch the spring water with her 10 fingers, will make stewed deer tendon herself. It would be amazing to be able to tell the kitchen that this dish was made for her father, and it would be a filial daughter to cook, and Pei's hen, who does not lay eggs, can really talk about it. The atmosphere on the table was undercurrent. Some people were talking and laughing, and the rice in their bowls had been poked until it lost its heat. Just at this time, Sui Xin, who had not come to Langzhen courtyard with attendant Ming Tan, told the maid outside the door, and suddenly entered the room quietly. Sui Xin approached Ming Tan with small steps, and pushed Lu, who was standing behind her. While serving the meal, she whispered a few words in Ming Tan's ear while serving the meal. Ming Cho kept staring at Ming Tan, so naturally he didn't miss this scene. Seeing Sui Xin whispering a letter to Ming Tan under the table, Ming Tan still received it calmly. She had a premonition that something was wrong, so she quickly raised her voice and said, "Fourth sister, someone sent you a letter? Who sent it? The is mysterious. Secret." Several people at the table followed the voice and looked over. "It's nothing, it's from the cousin of the Bai family. I asked my cousin to do a small matter before, and I thought it had a result, so she wrote to me to let me know." Ming Tan wrote lightly. Ming Chu refused to let go. Since the meal has to be delivered, it must be very important for the cousin of the Bai family. "Fourth sister, why don't you eat after reading the letter? If she is in a hurry to return, she might as well send someone to tell her." Ming Ting Yuan felt that Ming Chu's words were quite reasonable. He was in charge of the military and political power, and he was most afraid of delaying the military situation on weekdays. Seeing that Ming Tan was in a dilemma, he thought she was afraid that she would break the rules when reading letters, so he self-righteously said, "It's okay, the family doesn't pay attention to these things, you just read, and if there are any important things, you can reply in time." Ming Tan wanted to say something, but Ming Chu didn't give her a chance to refuse, and directly ordered the maidservant who was waiting beside her, "Not yet, fourth sister is the most particular, how can you read the letter if you don't wash your hands?" Soon, the veils and clear water were delivered to the eyes. Ming Tan seemed to have no other choice but to spread the letter with clean hands. At first, she looked normal. But she didn't know what she saw. She paused her eyes, pursed her lips, read the letter faster and faster, and her complexion became paler. After reading the whole letter, she read it again from the beginning without giving up. It's just that after this time, she was pale and crumbling. "What's wrong?" Ming Ting Yuan frowned. Ming Tan didn't respond. Supa covered her lips, her eyes were full of disbelief. In just a moment, her eyes turned red and tears rolled down. Seeing the situation, everyone panicked, and Ming Ting Yuan snatched the letter from her hand. He read the 10 lines at a glance. Although he didn't know what happened to the drowning in the letter, he was not a fool. The letter clearly stated, on the day of Shang Yuan, the two people who knocked Mingtan into the water had already left Beijing, and it was difficult to find them after many twists and turns after chasing them to Lizhu. These two people are not a thief and a stolen person who have never met before, but a pair of brothers. According to the two brothers, it was arranged long ago to bump someone into the water. The two of them got orders from Mrs. Linguo, and Shang Yuanyi secretly followed Liang Zixuan, obeyed his orders, and acted according to circumstances. That day Ming Tan happened to be setting off the river lantern at the pier. If Liang Zixuan found her, he would try his best to lure her to the water's edge and sing the whole scene of the hero who accidentally fell into the water to save the beauty. Crack! Accompanied by the sound of slapping the table, the delicate bowls and dishes on the table shook. Ming Tingyuan was furious. How unreasonable! Seeing this, Mrs. Pei quickly took the letter and read it carefully. After reading it, she was even more shocked than Ming Tingyuan. Shang Yuan Mingtan fell into the water, and the son of the Liang family covered it up. She also thought that the government of the Duke of Ling was very kind and thoughtful, and he was a friendly family, but this matter was originally written by the government of the Duke of Ling. This is too unbelievable. What's wrong with fourth sister? What's written in the letter? Seeing the reaction of the three of them, she knew clearly that something must have happened. She couldn't hold back, eager to read the contents of the letter. But it is obviously impossible for Mrs. Pei to give it to her. The Pei family has been in charge of the family for many years, and has experienced many things. Apart from being shocked and angry, he quickly understood that nothing else matters now. The most important thing is to understand why this happened and how to deal with it. She got up and said calmly, "I'm here for lunch today, let's go." This is Langzhen courtyard. If Mrs. Pei said to leave, she would have to leave if she didn't want to. Ming Chu still wanted to stay and watch the excitement, but Zhang's mother blocked her and invited her out respectfully and forcefully. Compared to Ming Chu, Shen Hua was more obedient, neither listening nor asking too much. But before leaving, she subconsciously glanced at the supa in Ming Tan's hand. Soon, only Ming Tingyuan, Pei Shi and Ming Tan were left in the house. Ming Tan seemed to be tense for a long time. When the door closed, he suddenly cried. When she cried so much that it was like a pear blossom with rain. I felt sorry for her. His eyes were red, his thin shoulders were trembling, and his frailty seemed to be broken by the wind. Ming Ting puts his hands behind his back, the pressure of fire builds up and down. He is afraid that he will frighten Ming Tan if he opens his mouth. After a while, he asked in a deep voice, "What's going on? What's falling into the water? Why don't I know?" Pei patted Ming Tan's back and comforted him, "Master Ho, calm down first." Immediately afterwards, she told Ming Tingyuan about Shang Yuan falling into the water. Hearing that Ming Tan didn't have physical relationship with Liang Shiza that day, and outsiders didn't know that it was Ming Tan who fell into the water, he calmed down a little. Ming Tingyuan, Duke Ling's mansion must have lost its mind and went insane, planning such a lowly thing. This is also what Mrs. Pei thinks is wrong. It is reasonable to say that the two governments have already made a marriage contract, and Ho Ye can put it on the agenda when he returns to Beijing. It is really superfluous to design a drowning rescue. She paused, and then said, "Unless the government thinks that this marriage may change after Lord Ho returns to Beijing." Change? What change? The baby marriage that Bai had made before his death, everyone in the capital knew about this marriage. Is her son dying in a hurry to trick a daughter-in-law into the house to keep chastity and earn a chastity memorial for their family? If you are going to die, dare to go into the water in winter, then you will be clean if you die under the water early. Ming Tingyuan's words came to his lips, but he suddenly thought of something. Wait, he hasn't been in the capital for the past few years, and he didn't know many things in time. Could it be that the Duke's mansion is involved in some serious matter that cannot be dealt with? Must use the marriage to tie Ming Tingyuan to the same boat? Officials can get involved in everything. Seeing Ming Tingyuan's serious face, and not knowing where he was, Ming Tan hurriedly choked up and said, "Actually, my daughter knows why the Liang family is like this." Word by word, she told the whole story of what she had heard in the study of Duke Chang's mansion. "We got married with my cousin, and gave birth to a 2-year-old boy." After hearing this, the shock in Ming Tingyuan's and Pei's hearts was beyond words. "Ming Tingyuan, why didn't you say such a big thing earlier?" Ming Tan shed tears as he lowered his eyes and said, "My daughter thinks that this marriage was decided by her birth mother, and I heard that their Liang family has some roots in the official department. My daughter doesn't know the government. The promotion evaluation that affected Dad's transfer back to Beijing. What kind of thing is the Liang family? It can also affect Lao Tzu's transfer and promotion." Ming Tingyuan was furious, and even Lao Tzu jumped out. "Daddy, don't be so angry. Look, it's this time, and I'm worried that he will be blown out of anger. His daughter was born so graceful, well-educated, gentle and dignified, and also understands that the overall situation is the most important thing, and filial piety is the first priority in everything. She is simply a model of a famous lady who can't be found with a lantern. How can she allow the Liang family's immoral lazizi to be so cruel? Don't be afraid, Ah Tan, I will decide this matter for my father." Ming Tingyuan's heart was so angry that he couldn't bear it for a moment. He slammed the door and walked out after speaking. "Lord Ho, Lord Ho." Mrs. Pei didn't stop, and hurriedly comforted Ming Tan with a few words. "Ah Tan, the Marquis will definitely decide this matter, but it is inappropriate to be so impulsive. You don't need to worry, let Sui Xin Lu serve you first. Go back and rest, I will go to Master Ho to have a good discussion." Ming Tan was thinking about this. She nodded and said, "Mother, you must persuade Daddy." Pei didn't say any more, and hurriedly chased him out. Sui Xin and Lui listened to the cries and roars outside the house for a long time. They couldn't help worrying in their hearts, and got Pei's order. They hurried into the house. Miss, you didn't." Sui Xin didn't finish her words, and suddenly stopped in place. The house was silent. Most of the delicacies on the table have not been touched. Her young lady sat at the table, fanned her eyes with her hand, and refilled herself a cup of tea slowly. "Are you okay?" Sui Xin finished the second half of the sentence subconsciously. Ming Tan said, "It's nothing serious, it's just that the veal you dipped in is really spicy." After Ming Tan finished singing this big play, all he could do was wait for the good news. But on the other side, Ming Tingyuan slammed the door and came out. Pei hurriedly chased after him, tried to persuade him methodically, and finally persuaded Ming Tingyuan, who almost rushed directly to Ling Qiagong's mansion. Thinking of the letter saying that the two brothers have been brought back to the capital and can face each other at any time, the Pei family prepared a gift and a car, and planned to go to the Duke Chang's mansion with Ming Tingyuan first. This trip to Duke Chang's mansion is of course to meet the brothers and understand the ins and outs of the matter face to face. Second, Bai Jingyuan, the Duke of Chang, is Ming Tan's uncle. This marriage was decided by his sister Bai Shi while she was still alive. If the matter of retiring the marriage can be discussed with him first, it will show the friendship between the two governments. The Duke's mansion of Jing'an is still completely unaware of the fact that the home mansion of Jing'an intends to retire. But hearing that the Marquis of Jing'an has returned home, the Duke's wife, Mrs. Li, knows that there is no impenetrable wall in the world. If she wants to keep this marriage, she can't delay this matter in her own mansion. She didn't say hello early in the morning, so she asked the servants to pack up the things and prepare the carriage, ready to send people to leave Beijing. The matter has come to this point, Zhuer, it's not that your aunt doesn't love you, your aunt and your cousin have also thought of many ways, but... Li Shi looked at the woman who had cried into her room and was already limp on the ground, and said pitifully, "You take brother Min to live in Lizhu for a while. After Miss Ming's family enters the door, the husband and wife have feelings for each other, and then tell her about the matter between you and brother Min, naturally there will be room for discussion." How can the young lady of the Ming family agree to take a concubine when there is a relationship? The woman called Pearl burst into tears. How come? Liang Zixuan hurriedly stood up. Mrs. Li glanced at him, beckoning him to shut up, then turned to look at Zhu'er, and said slowly, Brother Min is your cousin's eldest son, and you are Brother Min's biological mother, how can you not remember? Now the general arrangement is entirely for the sake of your cousin's future is also Brother Min's future, don't you understand such a simple truth? Hearing this, Zhu'er stopped her tears, and looked at Li Shi with flickering eyes. Okay, everything has been taken care of in Lizhu. You can live in peace of mind. When the time comes, your cousin will take you two back to Beijing in a splendid manner. Zhu'er wanted to fight for something more, but Li Shi lowered her eyes, picked up the teacup, made it clear that this was the end of her words, and she didn't want to discuss any further. Seeing this, the servants at Ho's side stepped forward to grab Zhu'er, held her down one by one, and half dragged and half held Zhu'er out. Cousin! Cousin! Zhu'er looked at Liang Zixuan reluctantly, and called him out. Liang Zixuan couldn't bear it, no matter how affectionately they slept together for quite a while. When Zhu'er left the yard, he couldn't help but intercede, Mother, is there no room for change in this matter? Cousin Shi! It's not your fault. Li Shi put down the teacup heavily, and shouted in a cold voice, Go back and be sober, don't be an eyesore in front of me. Liang Zixuan was a noble son outside, but he didn't dare to refute his mother at home. But after drinking him twice, he was so frightened that he saluted hastily and left in a hurry. Looking at Liang Zixuan's back, Li closed her eyes and felt a terrible headache. Among the women in the inner house, she can already be called swift and swift. Before the palace banquet started that day, she was still thinking about how to marry the Ming family's Tan back to the mansion smoothly. When she left the palace, she saw Ming Tan from a distance not getting into the carriage of the Jing'an Marquis mansion, but leaving with Bai Min hand in hand, and a plan quickly came to her mind. She sent someone to follow her from afar, and went back to the mansion to tell Liang Zixuan in detail how important this marriage is and how embarrassing their current situation is. When someone came to report that Ming Tan and Bai Min had left Tingye building and went to Nanyahe Street, she made a quick decision and planned to rescue each other by falling into the water. If this matter is completed according to her plan, it should have the best of both worlds, it will not spoil the marriage, and it can be used as a bargaining chip to keep Zhu'er mother and son. Forget it, I have to bear the responsibility of falling into the water. This plan failed, and the Marquis of Jing'an came back so quickly, what else could she do? They can only make such a bad plan to make Zhu'er mother and child disappear. Heartbroken until lunchtime, the servants came to report, Madam, the cousin girl and the young master have already left the city. The stone hanging in Li Shi's heart was finally settled, she waved her hand wearily to let people back down, intending to be quiet and quiet. From Shangjing to Lizhu, the journey is said to be far away, said to be close or not. It can be reached in 2 days with fast horses, and about 7 days with slower carriages. The journey was bumpy and tiring, seeing that she was far away from the hustle and bustle of Shangjing, and her servants were obviously treating her poorly since she left the city. Zhu'er felt more and more unwilling. Girl, let's rest here today, the road ahead is not easy, if you go further, it will be difficult to find the inn before dark. Zhu'er raised the curtain of the car, looked at her eyes, frowned and said, This place is so dilapidated, how can we rest? Tired for a day, the servant was in no mood to deal with the cousin girl who was doomed to be unable to bring her into the mansion after giving birth, and replied impatiently, If you don't rest, you can go on your own way. You. The servant stretched his waist, ignored her at all, and went into the hotel on his own. The nurse also got out of another carriage, and went in with the sleeping baby in her arms. Pearl, helpless, had to get out of the car. Following up at the hotel, she wanted to go up to see her child, but the nanny turned aside and refused to let her go. Girl, Madam has repeatedly told me to take care of the young master, so I won't bother you, you should rest earlier. Zhu'er, brother Min is my child, what do you mean? The nanny, like the previous servant, took the baby into the house to rest and ignored her. Zhu'er had a vague premonition of something, and her heart instantly became half cold. She sat down straight as if venting her strength, and was stunned at the table for a long time. The heat of the meal was almost gone, and she picked up the chopsticks belatedly. But a reminder from a strange man suddenly came from the table behind him, don't take the medicine. When Zhu'er froze, she subconsciously turned around. The man said again, don't look back, someone is watching. Hearing that the drug was taken and someone was watching, Zhu'er suddenly panicked, her mind was in a mess, and she didn't know whether to believe what the person behind her said. Just at this time, she caught a glimpse of a wild cat wandering under the table looking for food, so she pretended not to clamp it firmly, and shook out the food. The wild cat meowed a few times, approached lazily, first licked it, and then picked and chewed the food on the ground. But after a long time, the wild cat didn't have any special reaction. You lied to me. Zhu'er's voice was trembling and uncertain. The man explained, Ruan Jin-san will only make people weak and unable to escape, and it is not fatal. Pearl braced herself up and stared at the wild cat for a while. It nestled in place, wagging its tail slowly, and it really didn't move much, but the cat's habits were just like this, so it didn't prove anything. Wait! She was suddenly alert, what are you talking about, why should I run away? When I return to Lishu, I will marry Zhuangzi to fill in the house. Doesn't the girl want to escape? Or the girl thinks that she can wait until the day when the scenery returns to Beijing? When Zhu'er heard the words, she was struck by lightning. The attitude of the people around her after leaving Beijing did make her feel ominous, but marrying a steward to fill in the house? No, no, how is this possible? And she also has brother Min, who is the eldest son of her cousin, it is impossible for her aunt and cousin to treat her like this. The person behind continued, Mrs. Ling Qiagong has a dowry Zhuangzi in the western suburbs of Lishu. Zhuangzi is more than 40 years old. His wife died of illness a few years ago, and he never married again. He only has 4 concubines and 5 sons. In the steward's mansion, lanterns are hung and a happy birthday is posted. When the girl arrives, she can worship 3 times as a ceremony. As for the little son, the blood is inseparable. If there is a chance in the future, he will definitely recognize his ancestors and return to his clan. It's just that he will never have half a relationship with the girl. The girl will leave, and the mother and child will be separated. I think they will never see each other again in this life. These words sound extremely absurd. But her intuition told her that it was true, it was all true. The sound of teacups falling on the table came from behind, and the man said in a deep voice, Girl, if you want to go back to Beijing to earn a future for yourself, I can help you. It was cool at night, and the outside of Shangjing was pitch black, but inside the city was lit up at night, making it lively and brilliant. Changjihu Street, which is completely occupied by the Dingbei Palace, is probably a rare and quiet place in the city. Jiang Su and Xu Jingran were talking with candles in the open room of the study room. The candles flickered, and a shadow entered the room with the wind. They bowed their heads and replied, My lord, the girl and the child from the Liang family have been brought back to the capital, and they have been settled properly. Jiang Su said and raised his hand. The shadow understood and retreated silently. Xu Jingran circled 3 sunspots, covered his sleeves to take the chess, and said to himself, I've been thinking about why you made the move that night. Let Liang Shiza save Miss Ming's family, this marriage is a certainty, it's not a bad thing. Now, I finally figured it out. Daxian has been in power for hundreds of years, his family is deeply rooted, and his power is getting stronger and stronger. The Holy One has long wanted to trim it. A few days ago, the Holy Majesty took the most insolent and unrestrained Marquis Cheng In-ho who dared to touch the salt mines. It would not be long before the Duke's mansion and the Marquis of Jingan's mansion could not escape. If these two families get married, it will save some energy to settle the matter together. The Holy Majesty seems to have this intention too, but, you don't seem to want the Ming Liang and Liang families to get married, why? Didn't you figure it out? Jiang Su took a moment and slowly raised his eyes. I just want to understand that the reason why you saved people that day was because you didn't want the Ming Liang family to get married, that's all. It turns out that there is no need to think about it. Jiang Su lowered his eyebrows and sneered softly. He almost directly questioned the ingenuity of second young Master Shu, wondering if he was worthy of the little lady who was waiting for him to play horses in the street in Chunwei High School. Shu Jingran coughed, feeling a little embarrassed. After all, he has not yet entered the court, and many things are unclear. Jiang Su didn't make things difficult for him anymore. He looked down at the chess game and said, "Haste makes waste. Besides, pruning the family is not my intention." It was very quiet in the bright room, except for the faint sound of candle flames beating. Shu Jingran smacked Jiang Su's words with some meaning. The first half sentence is easy to understand. It is a bit too hasty to clean up the two in one go. In recent years, the Empress Dowager eats vegetarian food and recites Buddhism, and she is quite peaceful, but the Empress Dowager's family has deep roots, and has been a threat that cannot be ignored since the Holy Majesty ascended the throne. If the action is too big, it will inevitably leave some loopholes for them to win people's hearts. Divide and transform, relatively speaking, it is more complete. But in the second half of the sentence, Shu Jingran paused. He has never been able to figure out the relationship between Jiang Su and the current Holy Majesty. These years, the Holy Majesty really had nothing to say to Jiang Su. On the contrary, Jiang Su has not been very enthusiastic about the current Holy Majesty, and can even be called indifferent. Many times his attitude makes people wonder whether he is in the camp of the Holy One. The phrase "not my intention" also made Shu Jingran a little confused, whether it meant "not my intention, but I will still help you" or "not my intention, so I will sing the opposite of you." Jiang Su seemed to know what he was thinking. It is really rare for Ming Ting to dispatch troops from afar, let's stay here for a while. Then settled the last sunspot, you lost. Shu Jingran came back to his senses. At some point, Bai Ziai, who was originally slightly better, was forced by He Ziai, and he was trapped in the city of sorrow, with no room for mediation. But he didn't intend to play chess tonight, so he pushed the chess pot away, and he asked, "Then if you want to stay away from Ming Ting and ruin his daughter's marriage, what kind of marriage will you arrange for his daughter? Ming Ting is far away. Holding Yangtze Road in your hands, you should not be underestimated. And once the marriage is broken, it seems that many people will not be able to resist this temptation." Jiang Su didn't answer, just looked at him quietly. It took Shu Jingran a long time to realize something was wrong. He has always been as gentle as jade on the outside and inside, calm in dealing with things, advancing and retreating appropriately, but now he probably feels absurd. After concentrating on his words for a while, he laughed in disbelief. "Zhang Qizi, what do you mean by that? I marry. The queen has already arranged for Zhang Huiyu's marriage. As for Liu Ting, he is too affectionate. Then am I an unlucky person?" Shu Jingran still found it funny. Jiang Su stared, "If you don't marry, why don't you let me marry you?" Shu Jingran, "That's not a problem." Jiang Su didn't want to talk too much, so he went straight to see off the guests without lifting his eyelids.